Yeah, we're off. Hi, guys. Oh, the Gosslings. Oh, I forgot to load them. Hang on, guys. Okay, yeah, I've got it.
System of donuts.
Schedule blocks of work, deliver Amazon packages, and get paid weekly with Amazon Flex. Sign up now.
Greetings, everyone.
Good evening.
I'm Jonathan,
I'm Nick.
and we are the Gosslings. Welcome, all you wonderful warriors of the broken sword, to yet another episode of the Goslings.
Hi, Diane. Hi,
And,
boss. Good to
we
see you
are
guys.
a digital speakeasy of free thinkers, writers, esoterica extraordinaires, and just general weirdos.
Yeah. General weirdos talking about the weird stuff.
We're talking about all the weird stuff.
Yeah.
We hope you guys have had a good week, so we are looking forward to this one.
Welcome back. Yeah, this was a fantastic interview.
G'day,
It will blow
Tricky.
your
Good to
mind.
see you,
It will
mate.
challenge you.
Yep.
It will arm you, for sure.
Yes.
And before we get into all that, before we get into who we're talking to and what the interview is going to be all about, we do have some things that we like to do as we begin every live stream. We like to start with our toast. So we hope you'll join us for that. If you've been watching the show for a long time, you know what this is all about. If you haven't, grab your drinking vessel, fill it with the beverage of your choice, and just follow along. This is how we begin every one of our episodes. And who started?
I think it's your turn.
Yeah, it's my turn.
Yeah, I think
So,
so.
okay. Here we go.
That's
Take up
okay,
the broken
mate.
sword of your father.
I
And
just went
strike
with
down the
Alisa
darkness.
Childers.
Cheers.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Nick, tell us about these awesome mugs.
Absolutely. Let's go into the mugs. Actually, before we go into the mugs,
Okay.
we got several people watching. I just want to give a shout out to people in the chat. Tricky Subject, Randall Hill, Chris Caps, Yorkshire Rose, Cheryl Musgrove. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. You jumped on early. You were right there at the starting bell. Thank you. We're so glad you're on with us tonight. If you have not yet, if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, we would love it if you would take up the broken sword of your finger, strike down the subscribe button. We really appreciate that. Helps big time. And if you've already done those things, just give the video a like.
Yeah.
Really, really appreciate it. It's such a simple, easy thing you can do to support the show, and we would really appreciate it. Thank you for that. Sorry, I wanted to make sure we, check the boxes.
Yeah.
Check the YouTube video boxes that you have to check, apparently, when you do these things. It's like YouTube law. You kind of have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But we really do appreciate you guys doing these things.
Yeah.
Going to these mugs. This is a Kothon Spartan mug. It's handcrafted by master potter Joel Cherico from ChericoPottery.com. This is a replica of what the Spartans actually drank out of, a mug called the Kothon.
Yep.
We don't know what these actually were supposed to look like, other than what is written in the historical record. And so Joel designed these in collaboration with Stephen Pressfield, author of Gates of Fire, who is a subject matter expert on that. So these are fantastic. They're durable. They're beautiful. They're hand painted. They're handmade. Every single one is unique. Go to ChericoPottery.com, drink like a man, and get yourself a Kothon Spartan mug.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if you want to look like a Spartan,
Yeah.
well, you feel like a Spartan, you can go to JardaniJovanovic.com. Jardani Jovanovic hair and skincare products made by real men for real men. Or as I like to say, be as sexy as you are deadly. Give 007 a run for his money. Awaken your inner John Wick.
Wow.
What's the one that Nick has that's so good?
Men, give your better half a reason to doubt that.
With Jardani Jovanovic hair and skincare products.
Yeah.
JardaniJovanovic.com. give Mike Fisher some love. He's the owner of the company, and he's a Christian. It's a small family business, and they're great people. They're super generous. They support the channel, and they deserve every bit of attention we can give them. They're fantastic. We love them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, let's. We're going to be in the chat. We're going to play the interview for you guys. Jonathan, who did we interview?
We are interviewing Alisa Childers, and we had a great time with her. She is a lioness on the plains of darkness that is the modern day church and culture scene. She and I had a shared experience at a church that basically imploded due to woke culture. And we kind of went on similar paths, but she has been far more articulate and outspoken about it over the past, intervening years. And she's been great. She is on Mike Winger's show a lot. She has her own YouTube channel, and she is fantastic. She performs a bunch of interviews herself with a bunch of guests that are great. But we wanted to talk about her book, Live Your Truth and Other Lies. It's her second book. Her first one is called Another Gospel. You can find them on Amazon. I believe you can probably find them through her website as well. But they're pretty much everywhere where books are sold. And it's also an audiobook through Audible. And she narrates it. And it's really good. It's like her and Stephen Pressfield are like the only two people who narrate their own books.
Gutsy.
Yeah, and it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Alisa's great, though. We talked about woke culture. We talked about the church. We talked about our shared experiences and kind of where it led us to where we are. So it's highly informative. And really, a lot of it was to let you guys know that if you're experiencing this revulsion at woke culture infecting your church, you're not alone. You are absolutely not alone to feel that way, and you are not alone to have that experience.
Oops, sorry, wrong one.
And we talked about, what kind of things you can do to protect your family
Yeah, Diane, it was a Christian school, apparently.
and get out of that. So It's been really beneficial. And she is super professional, incredibly friendly, very generous, and a lot of fun. Like she's like the new bass mom, basically.
Yeah, basically, yeah. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
awesome. So.
You guys are really going to love it. We're going to be in the chat with you guys, and we will cut through about halfway in to check in on you. Without further ado, here is our interview with the great Alisa Childers.
Yeah.
Your YouTube feed.
4, 5, 6, yay! Now every 6th coffee is free at Coles Express.
Melbourne's hottest new musical and Juliet
is crap. Stop wasting your time watching bot-boosted shills and self-appointed gurus cloying for your attention. Instead, join the Gosslings interview live stream and podcast. The Gosslings, a dark-lit digital speakeasy of free thinkers. A super chat of radical truth-seeking wizards who eat trolls for second breakfast. Topics that'll make your mama's hair stand on end. Ideas that'll make your pastor's knees knock. Guests that will illuminate the hidden chambers of your mind. And interviews that strike down the darkness. Welcome to the Gosslings.
The traditional gender roles have been under attack. I mean, I remember when G.I. Jane came out, and you kind of talk about that aspect of things a little bit in your book. There is just this war, as Christina Hoff Sommers put it, there's a war on boys, for sure. And they hate boys in the classroom. But at the same time, there's this war to make, it's like they want to replace men with women. And they want to try and make women into some simulacrum of men.
Yes.
But, at the same time, women have been the largest, I don't know if they've been the largest voting demographic, but definitely the largest buying demographic since the 60s. And it's like there's this real Adam and Eve thing going on with this. You know what I mean? Like the serpent doesn't go to Adam because the serpent knows Adam will crush his head. But the serpent, who arguably is Lucifer, goes to the the more naive of the two, the more innocent of the two, because she's newly created, Eve. And he's able to trick Eve, and he knows that Eve will take that deception back to Adam, and because Eve is the woman is the man's weakness, then we will do, because you're the gatekeepers, as Jordan Peterson puts it, So a lot of it's like, we will do whatever we need to do in order to keep the relationship going.
Well, and Adam was standing right there with her. That is the one thing about the story, is that he was with her.
That's the thing. I've heard people like argue about this, about whether or not Adam was around or not.
Yeah.
It says in the text, she gave some to him who was there with her.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. See, Adam just, he cut real early. It just. But that seems like, I remember talking to our pastor about, he always had a problem with, like, he didn't know what to do with the Adam and Eve story. But honestly, when you look at like 21st century, sociopolitics in America, it's like, man, it's like the Adam and Eve story is playing out. I don't know. It just, but the swapping of the roles, how do you fight that?
Well, one of the ways that I think, and I do see a lot of this, and I'm very thankful for it. I do see a lot of women pushing back on that and reclaiming the beauty of motherhood, reclaiming the beauty of the innate sort of, let me make a disclaimer, because it's always tough when you start to talk about gender roles, because there's always exceptions.
Trying to make it
not every woman
focus.
is the same, not every man is the same, right?
Sure.
But innately, there, and this is, I think, where we have to reclaim the beauty of the differences. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing well. I had a girl, I told this story in the book too, but I had a young girl, I was speaking at a high school, Christian high school, and a young girl wanted to talk to me, and she was crying. She was just really upset. And she was like, I think a lot of her friends were boys, and she's just like, well, she couldn't understand why the Bible talked about women the way it did. And so I was trying to help her unpack some of the things Paul had said, but I took her back to Genesis. And I said, look at how God talks about women from the start, male and female. He created them in his image. He created them male and female. So there's something specific about the image of God in you as a female. And then I shared with her, I said, now think about even your body and the way God created your body. You have a complete circulatory system. You have a complete nervous system, a complete cardiovascular system, but you only have one half of a reproductive system. Now, and then I just asked her, why do you think that is?
Yeah.
And obviously, well, that's because you have to find the other half somewhere. Well, who has the other half? It's going to be a male. And that comes together to make a complete reproductive system. Well, what does a reproductive system do? It creates a child. It creates another person. And then I asked her, what do you think that God is trying to
Yeah, that's
tell
what I
us
thought,
about the
Diane.
beauty and the
That's the first time specifically Christian school was targeted because they're Christian. That's what I thought.
importance of what that child might need? That child needs specifically what only his mother can give him, and specifically what only his father can give him.
Yes.
And it was as if this light went on, and she just felt this sense of relief, because she had bought in, she didn't realize it, but she had bought into the lie that if we're different, then we're lesser.
Right.
And she would even say, well, why did God make us different? And that's when I shared that story with her. And it was like this light went on. And I think that we need to recapture the beauty of, again, with reproductive justice and all of these types of slogans, we've pathologized motherhood and being a wife and a homemaker. And I mean, think about, and that's what I always love to tell audiences. I say, look, I love the idea that God, I can tell by my body that I was created to carry a child, nurse a child, help form a new child as they grow up. And part of the importance of that is the home. The home is everything.
Yeah.
And guys, God entrusted women with that. God entrusted women with all the new men. I mean,
Yeah.
think about that.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
It was funny. I was speaking to a group of Mennonite women once, which those are my people. I just
Cool.
love those ladies. But they each have like 2 kids on their back while
I think
they're
that's where I'm going to wind up, Alisa.
they've got a couple kids on their back while they're sweeping, while they're listening to me talk. It's like and and probably, just other things as well. I mean, they're just doing 10 things at once. And I said that to them, and it was the funniest reaction, because usually when I tell women that, they get excited and they start, all the Mennonite women were like, yep.
Yep.
Like, they just knew it. They already knew it. It was great.
Preaching to the choir.
They're like,
Uh-huh.
That's great.
And that's why they're the future. Once the techno-apocalypse happens,
Yeah.
and AI wipes everybody out, it's going to be the Mennonites who are left. And you know what? Good for them.
Yeah. They can even start their own Whole Foods just from the stuff they make on their street,
That's right, yeah. Whole Foods used to sell raw goat's milk, by the way. Yeah, once upon a time back when it was called Wild Oats. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
About 2
I remember
years.
when it's called Wild Oats. Yeah.
That's how old I am. So I wanted to ask you, really, in keeping with that, how did your journey from that church lead? Did you have any sort of catalyst moment or epiphany that really triggered you to? Were you sitting in a class one Sunday and you heard something, and you're like, it just hit you the wrong way, or was there just this slow build up brick by brick over time that just eventually collapsed?
Oh, it was constant from the very beginning.
Really?
I was just in utter turmoil the whole time because everything that we were discussing was just so. It was just this angst all the time. There wasn't one moment where I was like, oh, maybe this is a little off. I mean, I remember from the very first class calling him saying, I'm really confused about this book that you're having us read. I actually thought, bless my heart, I thought he was maybe seeing who could spot deception.
Right, yeah. Look,
we're gonna read
gaslighting
this
trick.
book and see who can spot the lie here. And I remember calling him and saying, this is so confusing to me why we're reading this book. I mean, do you agree with this book? Is this where you're at? And he was, he danced around it. He was brilliant at, being slippery out of things.
Oh, yes.
And yeah. I mean, that was his great talent. Great orator, great speaker.
Very charismatic.
And and he just, I remember he said, I wrote about this in my first book. He said, just if you need to ask me a point blank question, just ask me. And early on, I said, okay, do you believe that hell is real? And do you believe that the Bible is divinely inspired? I don't know why those were the two questions I came up with.
Good questions.
Yeah. And he said, without any hesitation, he said, absolutely yes to both questions. And then I realized months later that with the words, we talked about words getting redefined. By hell, he meant, maybe there's a rehabilitation program that God puts people through called hell, or maybe it's the consequences of our bad actions on earth. And then divinely inspired, he meant it is something that inspires you, like a Tozer book or.
Now, see, I can see, because we had that conversation a lot. I could see a legitimate argument for the restitution of all things from an intellectual, biblical, let's chew on this. But that whole, what I mean by divinely inspired is
that was bait and switch. Yeah.
Okay. You belong on a hook that I'm gonna throw to some fish. That's how wormy that is. Yeah. When you were going through that journey, how did, in sort of keeping what we were talking about with gender roles, how did your husband react to all of this? Was he in lockstep with you, and how did it translate to the rest of your family? Did it make sense to them?
No, we love
Did
the
you upset the
articles.
apple cart? Or
So I keep sending you
I've been
links.
waiting on you the whole time.
We
I
love
knew it
them.
was crazy.
Well, no. So my husband was totally unified with me the whole time. I'm so thankful for that.
That's
There wasn't a moment when
you talk about him in the book, and he seems super cool about it.
He's super cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's, there was never one moment where he wasn't totally with me, but he also really trusted me and respected my ability to navigate it. So I would come home week after week just saying, oh my gosh, you won't believe what they said this week. And, he'd kind of like, yeah, it's okay. That's crazy, but it was when they invited, the pastor invited the spouses to come to one of the classes. And so even though I had been talking to my husband about it, I think him experiencing it for himself was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I'm so thankful to him, because we got in the car right after that class, and he just said very calmly, he said, we're done. You're done.
Nice.
We're not raising our kid here, and we are leaving this church. And I felt such a sense of relief because, and again, this is where I think gender roles are important. Every strength that we have innately comes with a weakness. And I think, generally speaking, of course, there are exceptions, but women are hardwired for motherhood, which means we might be more emotionally sensitive to the emotions of others, which is a good thing because that's what makes us good mothers, to be able to analyze and predict the feelings of others and be sensitive to those feelings. But I was staying because there were baby Christians in that class. There were a couple people who that was their first experience with Christianity. And I was staying to try to make sure they didn't get lost. And that was a weakness because my husband knew it was time to go. And I was actually very relieved and thankful.
You know, that's such a beautiful microcosm of something that we talk about sometimes on the show, but is kind of like a warpath of mine, of like the leadership of men, you know, and what it means to be a leader.
See, now it's glared on and off.
The compassion of women, you know, and like that is a classic example of how your compassion, justified, righteous compassion for these people,
it's not focusing,
can be used against you. And how, like, as I remember, one of the last bits of like real advice my mom ever gave me after Dad died was, she was like, Jonathan, at the end of the day, women just want to be protected, you know. And I had always like gone after these like headstrong, tough chicks, you know. So like I was like, oh, whatever. But no, she was totally right. Just like that, simple faith.
Even the headstrong ones want to be protected.
Absolutely.
I think it's such a lie, and it's a lie that's being sold to young girls. Is that to want to be protected makes you weak or makes you somehow less than. I think it's so ridiculous, and it's just so sad to me what culture is doing to men and to women.
Oh yeah, I got yelled at one time by a girl on a date for holding the door open for her. She told me, I'm a strong, independent woman.
Oh.
Saying, well, there ain't going to be another one of these. Like, you know, I didn't go to the really expensive place.
Did she pick up her half of the check?
Oh, of course not.
Oh, that's the...
Right, of course.
You should send her a bill. You should have sent her an invoice.
A Venmo invoice. Yeah. You know what? I could probably find her right now. Watch out, Hannah. You're about to get hit.
Did you call an Uber for her so she could strongly and independently get herself off?
Man, I tell you, it's a dangerous game out there. Yeah. Well, and one of the reasons why, like, I bring this up about, you know, the church or, you know, your experiences there, or these gender role things is, like, honestly, these are the kinds of things that you're not allowed to talk about around the water cooler. Whether, especially if your church is like having this problem. And I think there are a lot of people out there who feel totally isolated, like they can't talk to anybody, or they feel like they're gaslighted or gaslit, and and they feel like they're just like totally in the dark on their own, and they're like, I don't know if I'm taking crazy pills or not. Like their experience is your experience, you know. They're not alone, I guess, is what I'm saying. But if you don't talk about it, people will feel like they're alone.
Yeah.
You know? And they'll just let it go, and they'll keep going to that church, you know, or they'll keep dating that person, you know, or they'll keep hanging out with those same friends. So it's Anyways, okay. Nick's got like 8 questions. I know they're all way better than mine. So
they are not. They're not. Going back to what Jonathan said about possibly the idea behind all of this, like people just wanting to perpetuate childhood. You know, it seems like the progressive movement in progressive Christianity and progressivism in general, it's like we're trying to progress towards just the self.
No way, Tricky. They got a nuclear bomb they call the Poseidon bomb, do they? Wow, that's pretty heavy.
It's just a progression towards a more self-centered life. Or self-centered culture. Talk about the idea, especially in this book, around being true to your authentic self. Talk about that concept.
What is the authentic self? Alisa?
Oh, I don't want to live my authentic self. I did an interview with Janet Parshall, and she said, Lord, save me from my authentic self. And I was like, I wish I'd have thought of that. That was so good. That's a great line.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So if you think about the word authenticity, it's, again, all of this deconstruction of language. So authenticity, classically defined, means being genuine, not being fake. Authenticity is a good thing. I think Christians should be more authentic in that we want to confess our sins to one another, be honest when we're having a hard day or going through a really difficult time, and let our brothers and sisters in Christ walk with us through that and pray with us through that, and not feel like we have to show up to church every Sunday morning and just be the most victorious person there. And it's okay to hurt and to struggle and to share that with one another and be authentic in that way. That's not what culture means when they're talking about your authentic self.
Yeah.
And so I think the best way to think about it is culture would say that authenticity means I am what I feel I am. So in other words, you should dig down inside yourself and locate and identify your deepest desires. And once you do that, and this is the cultural definition of your authentic self, you identify your deepest desires. But see, it's built upon the idea that what you're going to find down there is good, right? That we're not inherently sinful, that there's a core of goodness down there. So whatever those desires are by nature going to be good. And so we need to name them, embody them, speak them, make them.
He hit the nail on the head, didn't he? Homosexual weirdo. You know what? My friend Greg, who's very pro the Ukraine, I showed him that, and I showed him where they were all dancing in S&M outfits and doing all the homo stuff, and he said it was a comedy sketch. He couldn't accept it. He couldn't say, yeah, you're right, that's pretty sick. He said it was a comedy sketch.
Our entire identity, and then live them out as our true authentic self. So whatever desires you find down there, I mean, I'm sure culture still would make exceptions of certain desires that somebody might find down there, but they can't do it and be logically consistent. If there's no standard of morality outside of ourselves, then you can't tell the person who's inclined to murder people that they shouldn't embrace that true self. I mean, you don't have a logical case to make on that if you don't believe in objective morality. But generally speaking, especially when it agrees with cultural sexuality and things like that, whatever you find down there, don't let anybody tell you that you can't live that out or that can't be your true identity. And so it has to do with identity. I think culture has led us to believe that what you do, what or whom you're attracted to, your hopes and dreams, maybe for some it's their ethnic background or your gender, like all of these things have become our identity. And whether or not that lines up with our biological, existence or whatever, but you're just supposed to live that out and expect everybody to get on board with it. Whereas this is where I said earlier, I think Christianity, the Bible, gives us so much more satisfying answers to these deep questions, because what the Bible actually tells you is that if you do some self-searching and you look inside yourself deeply, you locate your deepest desires, you're going to find that many of those desires are in contradiction with what is actually good. Yeah. And that's where the beauty of the gift of repentance comes in. I mean, people hate that word repent, like it's something mean or fire and brimstone. But I mean, what a gift to tell people you can repent. Yeah. You can turn from that and turn towards Jesus, and death to all that stuff, and it's gone, it's forgiven. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's a beautiful message when Jesus went around saying, repent and believe the gospel. But that's Christianity offers us that ability to repent, or that gift of repentance, so that some of those things we find need to change, and they will. As we walk through our sanctification process, we will be more and more conformed to the image of Jesus every day. I mean, what a better answer than just find whatever's down there and live it out. Because you can end up hurting yourself and other people, not to mention the eternal consequences of that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's almost like there is a hedonistic self-destruction, at the base of your authentic self. Even if you find something good, like, that's whenever you talk to, or whenever I've had these conversations with people, it's always like, well, which is it? Is it like my authentic self, is who I really am, and therefore I should be able to identify as whoever I discover down there, or is my authentic self bad and it's something that should change? It's like, well, like, it's not that simple. Like, repentance, as you say, it's like an opportunity. It's like a second life in a game. It's like you have the opportunity to like try this again. And you have infinite response. But at the same time, if you dig into, you do want to find your authentic self. We talk about this sometimes, like as writers, as fiction writers, especially. It's like it's kind of heady and weird, because you're living in like these made up worlds, and you do have to find like you have to write to your authentic self of like you don't want to write to a demographic. You don't want to be phony, right? So like that's kind of like that word salad thing.
Yeah.
With your authenticity. But at the same time, when you find your authentic self, guess what? There's going to be some stuff down there that needs to change.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And when you had that quote from Janet, was that her name?
Janet Partial, yeah. She's a
Partial.
radio host on, I think, Moody Radio is what she's on.
I love that quote. Lord save me from my authentic self. I tell you, do you remember, did you ever have any experience with Margaret Phillips, counselor? No, she was a real big counselor, like in that church at that time. And
Okay.
she's local and she's awesome. She wrote this book called The Marriage Arc. I would love to get her on here, but she would love that quote. Like, Lord save me from my authentic self. I heard Margaret's voice in my head as soon as you said that. And yeah, that's just, that's the thing. It's never, in a way it's simple, but in the other way, it's never as simple as the detractors want to make it seem, because it's simple in a way that allows them to just make themselves their own gods and live their own way.
They conflate, they conflate authenticity with identity.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
They dig down deep, they find that one thing.
Yeah.
And because they believe that we're all inherently good, that one thing is now, because it's authentic, that is going to become their identity.
Yeah. And in a way, you are authentically good, but you're also like authentically a wretch at the same time. Like, God loves you. God didn't make dirt, but also like,
we're inherently sinful.
Yeah, we're inherently
bad.
Well, I think that's where, the doctrine of Imago Dei holds in tension with the fall, right? We know that humans are inherently valuable because we've been made in the image and likeness of God. This is how we know we're so different from animals, right? We are a special creation. There's something so deeply inherently valuable and good, but not in the moral sense, because in the moral sense, we know we're fallen because of the fall. We've corrupted that image of God. It's not lost, but it becomes distorted because of sin. And yet there's a cure for that. And that's where I think the Christian worldview just has such better answers for all these questions.
Yeah. And more complete answers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry.
No, it's great. It's great. No, I don't
Nick
know.
has a lot of tolerance for me. Let me,
Ooh, this would have been a great segue to my tolerance question, but we already did that.
I know, we already did the tolerance question.
I got a great question for you. I got a couple great questions for you. I'm going to go to this one. This one's really fun. And this is a phrase from your book. Talk about digital courage on social media.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So it is fascinating to me how the culture of social media is. It blows my mind. The things people will say to you because they're typing behind a keyboard, and things that they wouldn't say to you to your face. They would never say these things to your face. Yeah. And so in the book, I talk about how, people talk about liquor gives you liquid courage to ask somebody out on a date or something. But it's like social media gives you digital courage. And people can even make fake profiles so nobody even knows who you are. And you can just abuse people and belittle people and mock people. It's unreal to me the way people treat one another online. One interesting example of this is I'm just finished writing a book on deconstruction that'll be coming out in January. And I have a co-author. And so my co-author and I reached out to several people who have big platforms in the deconstruction space online to see if they would meet with us privately on Zoom and just share and help us to, get the definition of the thing correct and all of that. And so one of the people that we met with had made videos about us, both separately, because we both have different YouTube channels, and just saying things that you're like, man, is this guy even going to be nice to us, right? Let me get face to face on the Zoom, and he's just a delightful guy. Yep. You're like, there's something about the social media thing that gives people that digital courage, because there's no real-time consequences for treating people that way.
Right.
You can just abuse somebody and then go get a coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah. I worked with a handful of girls at
I could see ya.
things where they were talking about putting together they called it a coven of basically like a hit squad that would go around on social media and find dudes who had misspoke, said right, and then they were like a cancel. I think they called themselves the Cancel Coven. They were like, oh, we should. I'm dead serious. Yes,
Wow.
this is last summer. Yeah, a bunch of 20s, muling, soft-handed 20-somethings who know nothing. A bunch of Jon Snows, and not cool Jon Snows. And so, but I had to tell them, like, you don't know what you're doing. Like, if you cancel somebody, like, let's say you get everything you want because this person said the wrong word, and you go after this person who never maybe said anything to you specifically, and you cancel this person, and they lose their job, because they lose their job, maybe their family falls apart, and their wife divorces them or leaves them, and now they can't, like, sustain themselves. Not for nothing, but, like, that sword cuts both ways. Like, that dude could find you.
He could have a Michael Douglas falling down moment.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like, there are
people go off the rails with that sort of.
People think that they can get away consequence free with stuff like that, but it's like, you push the wrong person too far and you get what you want and you make an enemy. Like, the devil in idle hands, man. Like, that person could figure out how to find you, and guaranteed you're not safe in the real world. So you're not, like,
but social media makes people feel safe enough.
It does.
To say.
Nick has a great phrase for it. What do you call
it?
I
call it safety behind glass.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And it applies to the glass of a computer screen or your phone, where you can say whatever you want. You're safe. They can't get to you. Everything's at a distance. It's a nuclear strike from the other side of the world. They'll never get to you.
Right. A social ICBM.
Yeah. It's from behind the safety of the computer screen glass, the glass of your windshield, your car, because you see it on the road. You see it, how people behave behind the wheel is not typically how they behave face to face.
Yeah.
The way they cut and honk and the aggressive
shake their fist.
And so there's the computer screen, there's the windshield, and then there's the glass of the gorilla enclosure at the zoo. People behave and act a fool because there's a 2 inches of glass between them and what they're mocking, that they wouldn't mock if there wasn't 2 inches of glass there.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's digital. It's the same thing as digital courage.
Yeah.
And you know what? And it's funny, social media. I mean, I really don't like it. I've never said anything on social media that I don't regret. It's like the biggest thing in my life, the two biggest things that have caused me more headache than anything else, caused more problems, have been my big mouth, especially on social media, and like taking shortcuts, But I think shooting off, it's easy for someone to shoot their mouth off and be a mocker or a scoffer.
Yeah.
Read Proverbs. It's, how much of the book is devoted to this is what the scoffer does, this is what the mocker does, this is what a fool looks like. And then we get on social media and we do it all day long, every day. I'm sorry to rant on that.
It doesn't bring out the best in us, that's for sure.
No.
Nick and I took social media off for Lent, and I'm telling you, like, do you think you could run, because, like, you had a career, with Zoe Girl, and you were doing all this stuff years before, we're talking now. Do you think, like, you could operate in the modern world without social media, Alisa?
I would want to. I hate it.
Right.
So I actually have a company that does my social media for me. And that has been the greatest relief. Now, I still have access to all the accounts, and I'll occasionally go on and take a look at things. But every time I do, I'm like, ugh, that is not good. So I think that I think I could. I don't know. I want to be honest about it. If I didn't have to do it for ministry, I might still keep maybe an Instagram account but a pare it way down, real small, I think. And but yeah, I don't think it's really doing us any favors. In the book I talk about, it's kind of like the Tower of Babel. It's the digital Tower of Babel, and it wasn't good the first time. And it's obviously something I talk about unity. It's like we all want unity, right? Unity, that's the big thing. But
Yeah.
not all unity is good. Not
Right.
everybody's unified around, goodness. People can be unified for nefarious purposes. And I think that there's so much toxicity in social media. So I don't go on it very often. I'm very thankful that I have a trusted group that does that for me.
Lucky.
That's
Yes,
fantastic.
that's the way to do it. I remember that was one of my favorite parts from Live Your Truth is when you were talking about the correlation between the Tower of Babel and
It's page 15.
oh,
It's
yeah.
one of my
I'm
favorites.
sorry.
I had it written down here too. That was
Yeah.
going to be my next question, but you already answered it.
What was
Oh,
wait a
Yeah,
minute.
the-
No,
well,
what-
yeah, the
what was
question was, how is technology facilitating our pursuit to become our own gods?
Oh, well,
And you
there we
just answered it. I love that part of it. Sorry.
Yeah, well, the Tower of Babel is such a profound comparison for what is happening. And to go back to what you say about repentance, I think you talked about it in the book about how God's judgment for us at the Tower of Babel kind of gets a bad rap.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, yeah. So I tell a story of, because everybody thinks unity is so great,
Yeah.
but unity just in and of itself is not necessarily great, because you can have people unified around, wanting to murder people, or say, unity just for unity's sake is not necessarily good. And so I was telling a story of my kids when they were younger. They were just very loud always, and they fought with each other a lot. And one time though, they got quiet for like 15 whole minutes. And I was like, I hardly know what to do with myself right now. Give myself some me time. And then after a while, I was like, this can't be good. And they emerged out of their room having drawn all over each other's faces and paint and all this stuff. And so I was like, oh, okay. So they were unified for a nefarious purpose, right? And so I had to actually separate them so that I could clean them up and all of that. And I thought about the Tower of Babel because everybody thinks unity is so great. And when Jesus prays for unity, he's talking about unity around himself and the truth of the gospel. He's not talking about just all people in all of the world having unity together at all costs. He's talking about unity around that one thing, which makes the gatepost or the guardrails have to be really strong. So you have to disunify to keep unity. You have to disunify with wrong things to keep the one thing protected, the good thing. And so I thought about that. It's like, yeah, the whole world was really unified, and they're speaking, they're communicating well. Like, isn't that great? But it wasn't great. And they were unified in their purpose to ascend to the heavens and let us make a name for ourselves, right? It was pride. It was wanting to be above God and be their own gods. And I think that if we're not careful, if we don't really intentionally think these things through, I've seen, sadly and tragically, I've seen people I respect theologically fall into these traps where they'll say something online and you're just like, that is so beneath you to talk that way. And you see it poison people. And I just think we need to be so careful.
Yeah, that is, when you place yourself in a ministry position, you are on sort of a knife edge of a mountaintop. Like it's easy to, misstep. And you have to be so careful, and people talk about that with us sometimes. They're like, oh, you guys are, you guys are like doing a ministry, and we're like, I don't know about that. Like, we're just interviewing interesting people. Like,
we're a couple of authors.
I don't know
who love interviewing other authors. That's how it started. And a lot of these other authors were writing things that were, some of them were in the ministry.
Yeah.
Some of them were just writing really interesting topical books that related to, Christianity, ancient history, and so forth. But
God may not, here's the thing, like, God's got to know your limitations, right? So God probably knows if you maybe shouldn't be in ministry because maybe that mountaintop is a little too, like maybe you're a little too club-footed for the mountaintop. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. There was a part towards the end of Live Your Truth that I found really profound. I was actually repairing a deck while I was listening to it, And I actually had to stop a couple times because it was pretty moving. It was when you were talking about the women in the prison.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how that really applies to the overall picture of Live Your Truth?
Well, I think one of the reasons I wanted to include that story is because so many of these slogans that we talk about through the book really only work in a very affluent culture where we have plenty of food, all the clothes we need, warm beds, Amazon that delivers our groceries in a pandemic, you know.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Everybody, you know, that kind of, even that, you know, people acting like this is the worst thing that's ever happened in history. And I'm just like, Amazon literally drops your groceries off at your door.
Yeah,
Like,
and maybe with a drone. Like, you may not even have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not I don't mean to belittle. I had friends who had deaths and things throughout that time. And I don't mean to belittle the very real suffering that people went through, but having to order groceries delivered to your door is not suffering. Okay. Yeah. But I wanted to include that story because it was an experience I had many years ago that really profoundly affected me. And I was on a mission trip in Ecuador, and we were invited to go into this women's prison, and it was a very unusual event to be able to go in there as Americans.
Wow.
And the only and we had to it was just a very small group out of our bigger group that was allowed to go in. And the reason we were allowed to go in is because there was an American missionary who had been working in the prison for many, many years, and she was trusted by the prison, you know, authorities. And so they allowed her to bring, like, I think maybe there was 5 or 6 of us that were able to go in. And as I walked in the prison, there was a line of men all the way around the outside, circling all the way back around, because it was visitor day where you could visit if you had someone in there that was in the prison. And all the men had bags full of oranges and even, you know, feminine products and different things. I didn't think much of that until I got in the prison and I learned more about how prisons work in other places. You know, in America, we think of prison and you think, oh, you get put in a cell with a bed and a toilet and you get, 3 meals a day and maybe some outside time or whatever. But in this particular prison in this country, and I assume in other places like this, just because you're in the prison doesn't mean you get a bed. It doesn't mean that you get food. So the prisoners have to provide that stuff for themselves. And so some of the prisoners had mattresses, others just had to sleep on the floor. And so there was, you walk through the first bit of it and there was so much sadness and the downcast faces. And the missionary knew all of the women and she was hugging people and talking to people as we walked through. But then we went into this one room and there was a group of maybe 15 women to 20 women in there. And they just had the brightest smiles and the most joyful countenance. And it was so stark from the women that were outside that room. And I said, who are these women? She goes, these are the Christians. Now, of course, the missionary had been evangelizing everyone, but these were the ones who had trusted in Christ. And they were so different.
That's
And
so cool.
another friend of mine who was a music artist, we both sang, and these women worshiped like so exuberantly and just didn't want it to stop. And then afterwards, they brought us into their living quarters, and this one lady had made a meal for us, and it was honestly just like these noodles with this weird brown sauce on it, and it wasn't very appetizing. But I felt so humbled because what I also learned was that because they had to provide their own meals, now not the Christian women weren't doing this because the missionary, one of the things she did was help them with a business of making greeting cards. So she would go out and sell the greeting cards and then provide some of their needs. But for many of the other women, that line of men, they were prostituting themselves for things like, sanitary napkins and granola bars and whatever else. And so knowing how hard it was to even obtain these things, I was so humbled to be served this meal, and everything in me wanted to say, no, keep it for yourself. But I knew that it meant a lot to her to serve us this meal.
Sure.
And I ate every drop. And I just thought that's being in music, I'd eaten in some of the fanciest restaurants in the world. And I was so humbled and grateful for this one little meal of brown noodles. And it was so impactful to see the joy and how all of the lies we talked about in the book, like you're perfect just as you are, live your truth, don't let anybody push down your true authentic self, would have meant nothing to these women in this prison. They needed the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I was blind, now I see. I was a sinner. I can be saved by grace. And that gave them an eternal perspective so that they could actually have so much joy in that horrible place, knowing that even, and many of them were there falsely accused. It's not like the American justice system where you get a trial. There was one woman who had been in there for 8 years without a trial. So it's not the same thing, you know?
Well, that kind of is like America now.
Well, I know, I was going to say, not that our system is perfect by any chance, but at least there's like due process, and you can have a court-appointed attorney. Is, you know, I know they're not always great, but at least it's something. I mean, you just had to look at somebody wrong and you could get thrown in there. And so, yeah, it was just, it was a life-changing experience for me.
How old were you when that happened?
I was probably 27-ish, 28, something like that.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Post Zoe Girl. Yeah.
Well, it was kind of at the tail end of Zoe Girl. It was a Zoe Girl trip.
Oh, really?
I think so.
Interesting.
I think, yeah, it was a Zoe Girl trip. Because we did we would take people on mission trips a couple of times, and that was a Zoe Girl trip. So it was near the tail end, I think, of our time. Yeah.
You know, when I was, I went to Lighthouse Christian School in Antioch, and our senior trip was also a missions trip, and we went to Jamaica. I think you went on a missions trip a few times too when you were in school.
Yeah, when I was in youth group.
And it was, I was 18, and we went to Jamaica, and you know, it's like half the time you do like all the stuff on the coast, but then the other half of the time you go a mile or two into the coast, inland, and it's a whole different ball game once you get in there. And I'll never forget. And I, you know, middle class, like suburban, upper middle class, you know, Brentwood background, like whatever, you know, kind of spoiled. But I remember watching a kid naked bathe in a literal mud hole as we're pulling up to the church, the like ramshackle corrugated tin and plywood church. And it just like, that was like the closest thing I think I've ever had to an epiphany moment in life where, you know, and I kind of felt the same, an echo of that reading this, you know, where you just realize like, I get so tied up and bent out of shape over so much stuff that like none of this matters.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Not only does none of it matter, but the stark contrast between, you know, the women who were prostituting themselves and the Christians, you know, and just how that attitude or that belief structure can change your attitude on such a core level that you can, I mean, you really can just weather anything like that, you know, and find the good in it. And
well, and think about that kid bathing in the mud hole. Are you going to go up to him and say, "You're perfect just as you are. You need to live your truth."
Right. Yeah.
Don't let anybody tell you you can't accomplish your dreams.
How condescending and and completely self-serving. That's the other thing about like this pathological propagandized compassion thing that, you know, it's almost this like Oedipal mother thing that Jordan Peterson talks about.
Compassionate narcissist doesn't he say that? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. That's the perfect phrase for it. It is compassionate narcissism. It's all about the good that you feel from giving the other people, you're bestowing upon them this great gift of, you know, and it's like, dude, whatever, you know, give them a Bible and like talk about, you know, eternal truth and love in that context, because that'll stick with them, you know, when the pain happens. I mean, that's the only thing that carried me through Mom's death, you know.
Well, and that's a message that's relevant to the kid bathing in the mud hole, all the way up to the billionaire who is living for himself. The same message is equally relevant to both of them. I do have to say, though, the word you just said, you got to remember that. You called it ramshackle, corrugated aluminum plywood church. Is that what you called it?
Yeah.
That needs to be a song. Like, that is a song title.
Well, I'm no musician. I write novels.
Country
so.
song right there.
Oh, you know what? I might be able to crank out a country song.
Yeah.
We'll see about that. I don't know. Does your husband write songs? We can pitch it to him.
He is brilliant at writing, like, he'll take any song and can make the lyrics funny.
Oh.
Any song.
Parodies.
We're big Weird Al fans.
Yeah.
So, is he a Weird Al fan?
No, but he actually had a song published many years ago called God Ain't Never Had a Grandchild.
Okay.
Yeah, God Ain't Never Had a Grandchild.
YouTube?
Yeah.
Can I find this on YouTube?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, it was recorded by the band Truth. He was in Truth years ago, and he co-wrote that song. with one of the other guys, and it got recorded, I think.
That's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm definitely.
While you're writing that down,
Yes, I am YouTubing. I am looking this up later. Yeah.
100% of Woolworths own brand seafood is responsibly sourced. That's today's fresh food people. Your light centre, night centre. See the starry light.
Hello.
Welcome back, everyone. Shout out if you're a Weird Al fan, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any Weird Al?
You're welcome,
Weird Al
John.
fans out there?
Mm-hmm.
Weird Al Yankovic. Yankovic?
Yankovic.
That's what I thought.
Weird Al Yankovic.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to get the second part of the interview here queued up. The chat's been fun to watch. Tricky said that he wants a Gosling sticker. That's right, folks.
Mm-hmm.
There are Gosling stickers.
How do you get a Gosling sticker, Nick?
I'll tell you how. You scan that code right there.
Scan
it.
There it is.
It'll take you to the magic sticker dispensing site that is our Patreon. It's our page. Shameless plug. Shameless plug. There it is. I'm going to leave it up there while I cue this video. That is one and probably the best way to get a sticker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Patreon, for anybody who's watching, we have a Patreon, and there are various tiers. And the lowest tier will grant you access to our guest list. We are actually scheduling guests into June now. We had taken about a month or two off because we had almost overbooked, but we are lining up guests in June. And then all the way up to free merch, discounts on merch, sponsorship packages that we offer if you want your product mentioned on our thing.
So many tiers.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different stuff. Digital downloads, behind the scenes content, all the interviews you're watching, by the way, the Patreon members get the unedited versions of those.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're watching is the YouTube friendly version. So, in the YouTube, this kind of helps us keep from getting channel strikes, to be honest with you, because we did get a couple channel strikes last year.
So now we reserve all those naughty words for our patrons.
Yeah.
So they can hear the YouTube no words.
Yeah, the no words.
Kira says, OMG, my young self loves stickers.
Yeah.
Who doesn't?
There's a little sticker, right?
Yeah.
I've kind of actually been kicking around the idea of getting some PVC patches made.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah, I had one prototype that I ordered and I showed it to Nick a few nights ago, and still needs a little bit of tweaking, and they're not cheap. That's like the only downside. I think the cloth patches are probably a lot cheaper, but the PVC ones are pretty expensive. But I like them a lot more, the rubbery kind of ones, you know. And so there's always stuff in the works. There's like Patreon exclusive merch that we have. We designed a cool T-shirt that's just for the Patreon. But the real joy of it is two things. One, you get exclusive content, so you get like the full unedited version, which oftentimes is worth its weight in gold because of what we talk about there, and it keeps us safe from having our channel get nuked. And then the other thing is we have an awesome community. Our patrons are really cool, and a lot of them are in the chat every week, and so like they can, they're kind of ambassadors for it in a way because just being able to talk to them, like some cool people to hang out with, and the Patreon page is no different.
Yeah.
All really friendly.
Yeah, we try to put as many benefits as we can keep up with.
Yeah.
And make those available to the different levels of our patrons.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. Compared to other Patreon pages.
We kind of designed it for, like, Nick and I both are, I don't want to say like
I love doing
frugal, but we don't have a lot of there's not a lot of extra money to throw around at anything. So you really have to be judicious with where you spend your money. And Nick and I kind of designed the Patreon to be what we would want, what would be worth it to us, So we hope you guys feel the same way.
Yeah.
But
and we appreciate those who do support, even if it's at the lowest level, the $5 tier.
Yeah.
It's a tremendous blessing to us and really helps support the show. Yeah.
It pays for the subscriptions. It goes towards upgrading all of the equipment that we're going to have to upgrade. It just, it all goes towards the show, and eventually, oh my gosh, if we could get to a point where like we were sustainable, we could just do this like 4 days a week.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
That'd be fun.
So.
All right. Well, we got the second part of the video queued up, and we'll go ahead and roll that now.
Yeah.
Nobody comment. I didn't see any comments about any Weird Al fans.
We were giving you guys
I think-
time. Jeez, come on.
I think that's their nice way of saying they're not, and that's okay.
That's all right. Well, everyone should go watch UHF. If
They were
you've never
probably like, if we say yes, they're gonna spin off and talk about Weird Al for the next
Yeah,
half an
get
hour.
back to Alisa Childers.
Yeah.
You know, Alisa's awesome, by the way. I told you guys, right? Like, dude, she's super cool. We were so lucky. I kind of had a connection, and I pulled a string, and I was like, hey, I really like this chick. Like, she's awesome. Can you help me out? And you know, is there any way, like, you think she'd ever want to be on a
John, don't worry about me, mate. I'm in Australia to be a hassle posting it. So just put it back into your show, mate.
show? And so my friend like made a connection, and you know, it ended up working out. And it was a long time in the making because our schedules and her schedule did not line up and everything. But dude, it was so worth the wait. And we're gonna get her back.
Yeah.
So because she is awesome and we adore her. So anyways, without further ado,
Alisa
Without
Childers,
further
part
ado,
2.
part
When
2.
Jesus talks about judging with right judgment and things like that, and Paul saying, is it not those within the church whom we're to judge, not those outside the church? We're talking about making moral judgments about people that we are actually called to do as Christians. And if we don't make these judgments, then someone who has a very destructive sin pattern, for example, it could destroy them. But yet, because as brothers and sisters in Christ, we're called to confront one another in our sin, to walk with one another, to lead each other to repentance, we have to make those judgments. And I think that culture is just allergic to that idea. And of course, they always appeal to the famous, you know, the atheist favorite Bible verse, judge not lest you be judged, right? And Jesus is saying, with whatever measure you judge will be judged you. And the point Jesus is making, if you read that passage in its context, is not that you're never supposed to make those moral judgments, but you're not supposed to do it hypocritically, because he goes on later in that passage to say, take the log out of your own eye. Why? So that you can see clearly to help your brother take the speck out of his eye. So the whole point of the passage is to help your brother take the speck out of his eye, but it's instructions on how to do that in a way where you're...
Yeah, John, I didn't put deconstructionalism versus truth in the title because I don't know what deconstructionalism means. So I just went with Alisa Childers because she'd deliver. I knew that, but yeah, big title.
Not a hypocrite. You're not guilty of something greater. You got to take a hard look in the mirror first and make sure that your heart is clean before the Lord, and then you can go and help your brother take the speck out of his eye. But it's interesting too, even in that section, Jesus refers to, you know, don't cast your pearls before swine, don't give what is holy to the dogs. You have to make judgments about people to know who the swine are and who the dogs are to even follow Jesus' words there, right? So he's expecting you to understand that you are to make judgments. In fact, in I forget, the reference isn't at the top of my head, but Jesus said in another spot, judge with righteous judgment. So judge rightly, judge righteously, and then of course from the other passage, do it without hypocrisy. So Jesus isn't saying don't make moral judgments about what people are doing. He's just saying don't be a hypocrite about it, and be aware that how you judge is how you will be judged. So
exactly,
you know, do fear and trepidation with that, and don't be this finger wagging sin police lady at church that's just so excited to find out latest gossip, right? That's not what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, and don't, if you're gonna call somebody out on Facebook and you love the person, do it in a private message.
Absolutely. I've done that so many times where somebody will say something that I could just go on full blast in the comments, but often I'll just text them like, hey, what's going on? You want to talk about this? Or where's this coming from? Can we talk? You know, that's social media is not the place to do that kind of stuff.
It's not. And you know, the irony of it is I have so many women in my life who, you know, if I said something, you know, because there's no impulse control, like if I say something online that they didn't like, you know, aunts, you know, like, you know, cousins, just, you know, whatever, just all these elders in my life, they will go all over the comments, friends for decades, you know, but then, and they won't send you a private message, but they will, you know,
openly, publicly
unleash, you know, and it got to a point where I was like, you know, I'm not like I'm not gonna argue. Like, I'm not doing this. You could always like send me a private message and like, but this is obvious. It becomes something else. It becomes an entrenched public debate at that point where everybody has to save face.
Yeah.
Grandstanding and
A grandstand.
Well, and I think there's like some wisdom too in that, it's tough. Social media is so tough because if there's a public person that's continually spouting heresy, right? It's like, I think it's good for people to go in the comments and say, hey, here's why this is wrong. Here's what the scriptures say. And for anybody who's onlooking to know, hey, there's another perspective to consider here. Right. I think that, it can be so tough to know where the lines are sometimes because, especially if you have a teacher who's reaching hundreds of thousands of people with a
John, I don't know how to do Patreon, but I'll get my girl to show me how. When I hang up, I'll try and do the Patreon your channel.
Completely anti-biblical message while calling it Christianity. Like, we got to call that out, right? As publicly as it's being spouted. But the personal things, if it's, and especially if it's somebody personally, that's even one line I have too, is that, if there's a book, a progressive Christian book that's just hugely popular, I have no hesitation going publicly and saying, here's why this is wrong, right?
Yep.
But if it's somebody I know personally, I'll always try to reach out privately first and just say, hey, here's some things to consider. Would you be open to talking about it?
Yeah, that is the far healthier approach. And you know who's really good about that? And it's so funny because like I've only known him for maybe a year, but our friend Gabriel Bella, the musician, the saxophonist, we've had him on a bunch of times. Amazing testimony. Like he was healed of cancer on stage playing saxophone in a church concert. Like and he's the kind of guy who, it's just so funny. You have all of your relatives who have helped raise you, and they will just unload on you, But then you have this one guy who you've known like 4 months who like sees something and he calls you. And he's like, "Hey, bro, you all right? You doing all right? Like I saw this thing. I just, I don't want to like, but
he treats you like a human being.
Yeah,
Christian.
Yeah, guys. John and Nick, they work full time. They do this in their spare time. So that's pretty generous of your time, John.
It's just reaches out to you privately.
We love that you do it.
I mean, the Bible says, if you have something against your brother, go to him in person.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't course correct, go to him again with, is it 2 or 3 elders of the church or something like that?
Witnesses.
And and if that doesn't work, then you might have to remove him from the fellowship for a while.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say to blast him publicly in front of all of his friends and family, which is what social media allows people to do because of this newfound digital courage with it that they have. Yeah, we had a lady call us. I don't know what we said or what we did, but something didn't sit right with her, and she and it was something that we like respected. We had seen in the comments before, and everything had been super great and friendly, and then all of a sudden she's publicly challenging our salvation.
Right.
And saying, don't listen to these guys. I don't even think they're saved. Like, whoa.
Yeah.
Come to me privately and tell me what did I do?
Because we made some stumbles.
But anyway, I agree. Sorry, we could beat this horse to death.
Okay, so that's something that always comes up. What is the standard for Christian living? And, because people always say this, that like Jesus is just a hippie that loves everybody, but clearly that's not the case.
My brother said that. He said Jesus was just an advanced hippie. And I said to him, well, what about Lazarus? And he said, who's Lazarus? True story, guys.
So how do you talk to those people, and how do you kind of like course correct that thought?
Well, I think that one is
tricky. What church do you go to? Is it a denomination?
It's easy to course correct if the person is willing to read the Gospels.
Yeah.
Because so often people get their ideas about who Jesus is from books about Jesus, but they haven't really engaged with the Gospels. I shared this story many times, but I was reading a progressive book about Jesus, and I asked one of my good friends who is she's really into apologetics and theology as well, and I said, can we discern through this together so that you can help me kind of analyze this for a review I'm doing? And we were out walking one day, and in her Bible study, she was currently in the Gospels. And she said, it's so amazing to me how I'm reading this book about Jesus from this progressive
Amen, Tricky. There's only one church, the Church of Jesus Christ. Denominations are traditions of men.
And reading Jesus in the Gospels. And it's unmistakable that these are two different people. This is not the same person.
Yeah.
Like, all you have to do is just read the Gospels and then read this book, and they are not talking. One of these is wrong, right?
Yeah.
One of these is not getting Jesus right. And so I think so often in my experience, and this is what I urge even young people to do when I go and talk to them about progressive Christianity, rather than saying what the Bible verses are, like, open up the Bible, get a physical Bible, open it up and show people where there's something about making that connection. I think
Yes.
that really, because people are so used to just doing a TikTok video on how mean God is in the Bible, and that's it's just a video, and then another tick, and that leads you to another one. And I mean, are you really reading the Bible? And so I think maybe opening up the Gospels, and if you have maybe somebody in your life who's willing to have this conversation with you, maybe invite.
Yeah, John, as a kid, I joined the Baptist Church Boys Brigade. That was like the Scouts. So I got a bit of grounding under that. If I was to call myself any denomination, it would probably be a Baptist, because that's what I'm most aligned with.
Them to read the Gospels through with you and meet every couple of weeks to talk about it. And tell them, like, underline everything that bothers you about Jesus, everything you read that kind of hits you wrong. Make sure you highlight that. Let's talk about that.
There's nothing about Jesus that hits me wrong.
Because
It's a good idea.
Jesus is going to hit all of us wrong at some point. Because if he doesn't, then, well, we're basically Jesus then. Because he's going to get all up in everybody's business, right? He's going to make the comfortable uncomfortable in whatever area. So let's talk about that. And hopefully that might get to some productive conversation about the real Jesus.
Yeah.
And don't forget the Jesus of Revelation, because that's Jesus too.
Right. Yeah.
Progressives
Well,
don't like the Jesus of Revelation, who
No,
cast
they
Jezebel
don't.
on a sickbed,
That-
threatens to kill her children.
Yeah, I
Amen,
wrestle
John.
with this all the time because, like, I've always had a problem with pacifism. So, it's like it was really hard. That church was like the only church in my life that I enjoyed going to. And, and not for this reason, but one of the problems that I've consistently had in my Christian walk, in my church life, has been everybody knows what to do with gentle Jesus, meek and mild, and turn the other cheek.
Yeah.
No one knows what to do, and no one will ever preach about sell your cloak and buy a sword, or the Jesus who comes back to lay waste to the nations.
Kills his enemies.
Yeah, that's a good point, John. They just teach the fluffy Jesus, not the righteous judge who's going to come back and judge mankind. Completely right.
With the breath of his mouth.
Yeah, the sharp sword goes out of his mouth and devours the nations. And so, like, there is this. I've been playing with this pet theory for a while now, that there is this emasculation in the church that, and it's I think a downstream symptom of society, because I don't think the church leads. I think the church has a way of kind of doing whatever, because they got to maintain that 501c3, So
They follow culture.
you don't want to you don't want to rock the boat too much, which is like, hello, it's like the whole point is to rock the boat when the boat gets out of whack,
Yeah.
But there's just nothing for men. Like it doesn't seem like there's anything in the church to like teach men masculine Christianity, because everybody's so afraid of like turning, all the men into a bunch of crusaders, a bunch of Knights Templar.
Well, and I think too that there's been some abuses in that area. Which so what tends to happen is when there's abuses, like you got the Bill Gothard thing or the Mark Driscoll thing, and then people overreact and they swing the pendulum so far away to the other side that they almost think that the enemy of men is biblical masculinity because of maybe some abuses from other people, and then
And John, it's not just the emasculation of the Christian Western man, it's the emasculation of white people. They're doing their best to emasculate us.
they move toward feminizing men because they don't want to end up
It's okay to be racist against a white, but all the others, no way.
like that guy.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what was because Dad did some records with
No, that's a different. That's
You're
Phil
thinking of,
Driscoll.
are you thinking of Phil Gaither?
Yeah.
No, he,
Well, that
he's,
too. Yeah.
he's thinking of Phil Driscoll.
Oh, Phil Driscoll. Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Wait. So your dad, who's your dad?
Larry Goss.
Larry Goss.
So, because my dad's an artist too, and Phil Driscoll played a trumpet solo on one of my dad's albums.
Hence the Gosslings. Your last name's Goss, not Gosslings. There's two of you, hence the Gosslings.
Oh, cool.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Our dads might know each other. I don't know.
They probably did. Yeah, Dad. Well, he was doing
Southern gospel orchestrations,
Yeah.
arranging, producing.
Okay.
Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir, the cathedrals, all that.
Okay,
lot of-
so they
a lot of
probably wouldn't have
quartets.
crossed paths because my dad was more in like the Christian
Oh, yeah.
rock stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, Dad got close with some contemporary Christian stuff, but nothing. But even then, it was still pretty much.
Yeah, it was
Rooted
mostly Southern
in-
gospel music, like mostly quartets,
Yeah.
choral arrangements, choirs, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but that is what it is. Maybe it's just an overcorrection, But
But
it
we're
was
trying to build a fence around it so we don't accidentally fall to that extreme.
right.
Probably what the church is trying to do.
But at the same time, what do you do for men?
Yeah.
How do you,
Okay, that's a good title. Tricky.
how do you teach men in a world, especially that is constantly trying to, get men to give up their spaces, and their, it's like, where's the place for men in modern society, and how does the church handle that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a tough question, and I think I'm looking up the name of this book because you guys are going to need to get this.
okay.
Nancy Piercy has a new book coming out called "The Toxic War on Masculinity:
Nice.
How Christianity Reconciles the Sexes." That is going to be such a good book. I just got a copy in the mail. It comes out. You should get her on your show. June 27th is when it comes out, but she's going to go into a lot of this stuff too. But yeah, I think that it's a lot of, I think music is a huge part of the problem.
Really?
Because, yeah, well, if you think about the way modern people have been trained to do modern worship, it's really female friendly, not male friendly. Even though you have
True.
men up on the stage, it's a particular kind of man, and not every man's going to relate with that.
Mhm.
Whereas I find, I don't do a ton of worship leading these days, but when I do, I try to keep it very simple, a lot of hymns, and the men sing. And
Yeah.
it's because you're not singing about my feelings. When you sing about, and I don't know if I'm more like a man in this one area, but when the songs are about how I feel when I worship, I'm in existential angst the whole time because I feel like I'm lying. I don't really feel this way. Why
Right.
am I saying that I feel this way? I'm singing this like a creed
Mhm.
that I feel this way, but I don't feel this way. And it's extra. But when I'm singing, "A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never."
Yeah.
Well, everybody can sing that because it's not about how you feel.
Right.
And-
it's
and
facts.
It's just, yeah,
You're pulling a Ben Shapiro,
I probably am.
Yeah.
Yes, facts don't care about my feelings. I want to worship
That's it.
and say what's true, and then
That's
maybe
right.
my feelings will catch up.
I had that same experience one time in that high school I went to where we would have chapel every Wednesday. And then we had this one that just turned into a 2-hour revival out of nowhere. I mean, it was like the Asbury of 1996, and I remember everybody around me is praying and crying and having this emotional, evocative experience. And I'm just I'm not that guy. I'm sitting
Yeah.
there just not feeling it. And it really made me realize that you can feel ostracized if you don't have that emotional, lockstep reaction. Because we know so many people who are like that, who are very emotional when they get into church and they love the praise and worship. I hated the praise and worship all the time, because it's just dude, but you would get those cool songs where you could sing about the fact.
Because it's boring. Praise and worship, the way some of the churches do it, is boring as hell. Oops.
Yeah.
It's
And I actually find myself more emotionally connected to those songs like that. Those are the ones that will get the mist going in my eyes, and
right.
Yeah.
Because when you start, when you stop putting the focus, and again, that's a Peterson thing, when you stop putting the focus on yourself, you start putting it on something else, that's where you find this weird, gratifying landing place for your psyche. It's like if you're singing about the fortress, the thought about you singing about the fortress is what comforts you, not singing about how you're comforted in the moment.
That's
you
right.
know, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like it becomes like, again, it's this emotional narcissism thing.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah, well, praise and
true.
worship isn't about what we're supposed to get out of it.
Exactly.
Right.
And guys, Hillsong, they actually do chants. They do chants, and all the kids hold their hands up like they're getting this superpower off the band, and they're basically just repeating mantras.
Right.
Exactly. But the whole way that everybody is taught to do it
Mm-hmm.
is about your experience, your worship experience.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Gabriel Bello, that saxophonist, he talks about that. That's a big thing on his channel that he talks about all the time. In our first interview, especially, where he says like the whole order is out of arrangement. It's out of whack. It's like we're singing the benediction when we should be singing the praise and worship. Like, have you ever experienced that where it seems like, you know, we shouldn't be singing this song here, we should be singing this at the end of the service, or like this just doesn't feel like it's in place? Have you ever had like any sort of alignment issues with any of those churches?
Well, I've had a lot of alignment issues with worship.
Well, yeah.
You know, it's just been it's been something I've been thinking about. I need to think more about it. I need to think more deeply about it, even just a theology of worship, because of course I've led worship for many years. I'm not doing it a lot right now, but I was in existential angst almost the whole time when I was I was an artist in residence at a church for about 10 years, and I would lead every 4 to 6 weeks. And you know, of course, I wasn't in charge of choosing the song, so I would have to lead songs that I had tension with. And I mean, there were a few times I just said, I can't do this song. This is just too theologically off or whatever. But I would try to make the songs work, because you're juggling all these different things. Like, you want to cooperate with leaders.
Good on her. She just wouldn't sing anything. If it didn't suit, she wouldn't sing it. Good on her.
You don't want to be that person that's just always complaining about everything. And it's just not even just all about you. It's about other people. And so I would try to do that. But I was really relieved when that phase ended, because then I didn't have that angst anymore. So now if I ever accept an invitation to do something like that, it's going to be very simple. And lights are, you know, if at all possible, lights on. It's just not about our experience of worshiping. So yeah, I think that, you know, biblically speaking, what's that?
No smoke machines then?
No, well, yeah. But see, again, sometimes you don't have control over that either. Sometimes people just do that, and you don't even realize they're going to do it, and they do it anyway. But yeah, I think that it's like the alignment thing, as far as.
Hi, Jay. Good to see you, mate.
I really do experience that, especially with the first song. I even think, okay, now I'm not, you know, dunking on the song I'm Coming Back to the Heart of Worship, because the heart behind that song was really great. But it's still a song about what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I'm coming back to the heart of worship.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I've made it. And then I'm thinking, you know, again, like we sang this recently in a service I was in, and I was trying to sing along, but I'm like, but am I sorry for what I made it? Did I make it that? Am I guilty of that? Am I repenting of something I don't need to repent of? Am I coming back to, did I ever lose the heart? Was I ever there in the first, you know, and it's like, I just want to sing about Jesus.
Yeah. You're caught up in this whirlpool of psychological navel gazing.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
It's praise and worship, navel gazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you say, I'm coming back to the heart of worship. And the very next line is, and it's all about you. It's all about you.
Yeah, we're gaslighting the
Lord.
Lord.
Then I keep singing about myself some more.
Gaslighting the Lord.
Well said.
God's just up there like, no, man, no, it's not all about me.
It's close. And again, I mean, I get the heart behind the song, and I appreciate that somebody is thinking those things through, but
maybe think it through a little bit more.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Speaking of benedictions, do you think they're ever going to sing one at Asbury?
Well, they're done now, aren't they?
I don't know.
They wrapped it up. No, they wrapped it up. They did. They wrapped it up. I watched the whole online service where they basically decided to end what they called the public phase. And so they did this big night of worship that had already been scheduled there. And that was it. So
interesting.
Yeah.
What was your, and I know you have a couple other videos, you've had some interviews where you've talked about this, but just kind of in brief, what was your opinion of the whole happening at Asbury?
Well, so this was a conversation that the Lord called me into, that I reluctantly went into, because, you know, a lot of cultural stuff happens and I'll just let it go on by. I'll just be like, somebody else will talk about it. I don't need to talk about it.
Yeah.
But this one, it was like, the Holy Spirit was just persistent. Like I was called into that conversation, and I made a video because, well, okay, so I'll admit my bias. I come from a charismatic background. I cannot tell you how many meetings went hours long spontaneously, or the sermon was interrupted by worship that just kept going on. I mean 24-hour prayer meetings. I just so when I was seeing what had happened at Asbury, to be honest with you, I was just sort of like, this isn't that unusual. Why are they making such a big deal of this? In the charismatic world, this is really common. This is nothing uncommon. And when they would show videos of the actual worship, and they're like, see, nothing weird is happening. It's just exuberant. And I'm just thinking, like, this is like every worship service I ever went to my whole life. And so I admit, maybe I was a bit skeptical, maybe even a little bit of cynical. I don't think I was cynical, but I just couldn't understand what the big deal was. And so I was speaking at a women's conference in, I believe it was Lexington, Kentucky, which is like 20 minutes from there.
Okay.
And when it was all blowing up, it was like 4 days into it, 3 or 4 days. And I just thought, I had this nagging thing, like, I can't be this close and not go. I have to go see it. So I drove there one morning real early. I couldn't sleep the night before, so I drove there. And I was kind of there. It was a Sunday morning, so there wasn't a lot going on. I guess the students had been advised to go out to local churches and talk about what was going on. So there was just like 30 people in there, and there was stuff in, it's just sweet. There was a girl singing a song, a worship song, with their guitar, and just wasn't much going on while I was there. But I had read stories of people saying you can feel the presence of God from 100 feet out of the building, and you start weeping when I didn't experience any of that. And then people have said, well, that's because you weren't.
John, do you know it was the Scots, the Australians, and the Canadians that put an end to World War One? When they put General Monash, an Australian general in charge of the tactics, he used a Scottish regiment, and he also used a general from Canada, and the three of them teamed up, and the war was over within 3 months. We have a good connection to you Canadians with the fighting.
There at the right time. And I'm like, well, is that how it works?
Right. Yeah.
So, like, did the Holy Spirit take a breakfast break, or I don't mean to be cynical about it, but
I understand.
If that's what's happening, and you're claiming this has happened this is 24/7 for days and days and days, and it's continued, then I wouldn't expect it to be any different whether there was 30 people or 300 in there, right? Yep. But at any rate, that aside, I got a lot of pushback on that, and people have honestly, guys, I don't think I've received more criticism over a video I've made than the first video I made about Asbury, which I thought was very reasonable. I didn't say it was false. I still wouldn't say that. I believe there was probably some really
Yeah, John, we've got one of the best militaries in the world. We are really good soldiers. We're really good fighters. We're the first ones to defeat Germany in land, the Rats of the Brook. And we're the first ones to stop the Japanese on the Kokoda Trail. So Aussies are really good soldiers.
Work that the Lord did in certain people's hearts. I've heard stories of people repenting of things like pornography and hatred. That's wonderful, and I praise God, and I think we'll see long-lasting fruit from those individual lives. But this whole craze of people getting in planes and going there like it's some kind of Holy Spirit hotspot, that's what really was bothering me, because they're just always looking for that high. And so I ended up like making a second follow-up video, and then somehow, this is how I know it was the Lord, because I never would agree to this normally and wouldn't even have an opportunity, but I ended up on the Justin Brierley Unbelievable podcast in dialogue with Gavin Ortland and the president of Asbury Seminary. Wow. And I asked some tough questions that I didn't really feel satisfied that I got good answers to, about if the gospel was being preached there, if cultural sins were being identified and preached against. I think those are valid questions to be asking when people are calling it a great move of the Holy Spirit. I would expect the cultural gods to be coming down, right? I would expect if the Holy Spirit was falling on a place like they're talking about, whatever theological language you want to use for that, I would expect the cultural zeitgeists, the gods of our culture, to be being smashed. Yeah. Right? Those idols, like the social justice God.
Wow, that's a pretty good point.
The immoral approach to sexuality and identity, those cultural gods would be smashed. if this were, what they're describing. So I think that overall, I'm certainly not negative about it. I hope and pray that there was some genuine work in anyone's life who called out to the Lord, and the Holy Spirit can meet them anywhere. And I'm sure that happened. But I have concerns because you have false movements that began to infiltrate and actually did. There's a important blog post everybody needs to read over at hollypivot.com about the New Apostolic Reformation and how they actually did get quite a foothold in that whole thing. And anyway, yeah. So I think overall it's a mixed bag, just like anything. There's going to be wheat and tares, and the Lord knows the genuine fruit and the not genuine fruit. And I just think it's interesting that, there's just no more talk about it. Nobody's talking about it anymore because they decided to end it. And now it's like, well, what was that?
Yeah, what was that? Well, it was just a month ago.
Yeah.
That it was, it basically kicked off there. Maybe a little more than that, but.
Well, and it's, there are people, I do see posts where people are saying, oh, it's broken out on this campus and it's broken out on that campus. And it's like, I hope that that's real, what's happening. But at the same time, people are so suggestible. I learned that about, at that church experience that we both had. People are so suggestible and psychologically manipulatable that it wouldn't surprise me at all for those things to be happening in other places with or without the Holy Spirit.
Well, there's such a cult of personality that can come into play too, especially when you have a charismatic leader. I remember the abortion question came up, and I remember it was 2008, and we were in that boardroom, and the question was fielded, when does life begin? Because that's always the question everybody comes.
Hello, it's good to see you.
And I remember no one, we were all kind of kicking around answers and everything. And I used to sit either directly to his right or maybe one seat. I was close. I was close because I was relationally, my friendship with him was closer than it was to anybody else in that class. And I was always very much like an introvert, kind of prickly. And so, but I remember, I'm the youngest one in the class. And I remember thinking like, okay, well, when does life end? Life ends when, there's a cessation of independent heartbeat. Like that's medically when we figure life is over, is when like the heart can't pump blood to the brain anymore independently, And so I remember saying like, okay, well, if that's when life ends medically, so you just reverse engineer it, and then this is when I guess life begins, when the heartbeat pumps independently, and no one responded to it. And then a week later, we had the same thing come up, and he said like the same thing. Everybody's like, "Oh yeah, that sounds great."
He said,
Yeah.
Well, when the heart starts beating, and everyone's like, "Oh,
yeah." Okay,
yes.
personality. There it is.
personality."
I get it, and I'm still probably wrong, but at least I've learned something about how human psychology works.
Yeah. Right.
I'm wrong all the time. But with Asbury, that's such a good point that no one really talks about. That's probably happening in any given state at any given moment at various levels. Those kind of revivals. And you say that people are chasing a high. They're also chasing hay. And you can make hay out of something like that. And so when certain high caliber celebrities in that world, suddenly fly there, to make something of it, it's like, okay, have we lost the authenticity of this, or is this something that is now being preyed upon?
Yeah, I mean, I think I will give credit to the Asbury leadership that I do think they did their best to keep that stuff out.
Good.
There was about halfway through that they made a rule or a proclamation that they really wanted to protect what was happening. And so they said basically at a certain point, they said students are going to be given priority to be in here. And, I think they even told certain news cameras like not to come in and not to broadcast. And I think they did do what they could. Got to give them credit for that. But it just, I don't know. It was just, it made me sad to think that people thought they had to go somewhere to get something that they don't have access to wherever they are.
Right.
And here's a question. I've not said this publicly, so maybe people will get really mad at me, but I can't imagine anybody being more mad at me than they were about
Right.
my commentary that week. But here's a good question. All those people, and I would like to just look into the eyes of some people that stood outside for 7 or 8 hours waiting to get in. Like, how much of your Bible have you read this month?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's God's revealed word to you.
Yeah.
That's accessible anytime.
Yeah, and look, if somebody were to look at me and say, I've read my Bible hours and hours every day, I'm just desperate, I want to touch from God, like, I would have so much more compassion for that than somebody who doesn't crack their Bible, but they want to go get some kind of experience, you know.
Yep.
And I'm sure there's probably both.
Yeah.
There's probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing too, that social media keeps us from being able to think in any kind of nuance. And you know, nuance is a firecracker word right now, because some people use it just to silence others and, oh, you lack nuance, and then they can shut you down. That's not what I mean. I just mean, like, you know, social media keeps us from thinking more deeply about things and be.
And John, as you juggle the chat when you're streaming, it's a lot to take in.
Able to see layers in things, and it's like it's either legit or it's fake. Well, it's probably neither, and it's probably both.
Yeah. Well, there's there's that thing that our pastor used to say all the time when it comes to like either experiencing God or reading about God. He's like, you know, I would rather smell the rose than read about the rose, you know. And right, I heard this a lot. Or, you know, I would rather kiss my wife than read about, you know, what it's like to kiss my wife. And I think that's like one of those seductive aspects of progressive Christianity that like pushes you for that experiential thing, you know. But if you don't have like a scriptural education undergirding it, then you have no ability to employ wisdom.
Yeah, it's like saying, I want to go to the destination on the map. I don't want to read about how to
Exactly.
get to
Well,
the
and it's also the
destination.
either. It's a
You need the
fallacy.
map.
This is progressives do this all the time. It's the either or fallacy. It's also called the false dilemma, where you present only two sides when more sides are available. Like, think about the kiss your wife analogy. I would rather kiss my wife than read about, you know,
kissing a wife.
The way he said it, I guess, was what it's like to kiss her. But really, what if you want to kiss your wife, and then what if somebody gave you a document that recorded her most deep inner thoughts and feelings and experiences and what she thought about different things and her opinions on different things?
Yeah.
Or what she wanted for her birthday.
Or how she liked to be kissed.
Or how she liked to be kissed. And you're like, oh, no, I don't want to read about it. I just want to kiss her. Now all of a sudden, you're kind of a jerk.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of a loser.
Yeah.
You can't win, in other words.
Yeah.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
Nailed it.
A kind of political question.
All right.
You said in your book, and I love this on page 25, truth is entirely unaffected by the tone and attitude of the person professing it. Here's the question. If believers out there hear the truth spoken by a political candidate, and it's a poorly couched, let's say the truth is poorly couched in arrogant, clumsy, uneducated language by, let's say a misogynist, like them, or a corrupt child sniffer, like Biden.
A corrupt child sniffer. I remember hearing this yesterday and laughed my head off. Let's hear that again, guys. Listen to what Nick says.
Unaffected by the tone and attitude of the person professing it. Here's the question. If believers out there hear the truth spoken by a political candidate, and it's a poorly couched, let's say the truth is poorly couched in arrogant, clumsy, uneducated language by, let's say a misogynist, like them, or a corrupt child sniffer, like Biden. What is the responsibility of the person hearing that truth?
Yeah, so when we talk about the nature of truth, those are good examples, right, on both sides. And that's where I think people have
John, that's funny, that. A corrupt child sniffer, because he's a shocking child sniffer.
adds the plot on what truth actually
How the
is.
hell is he running
That you're more
America?
looking to the character of the person who's saying it. Whereas really, anybody can speak truth and anybody can say a lie. The most, as we know from our experience, somebody that's really well dressed and well spoken and has a way with words and seems to be really genial and kind can spout outright lies. And then somebody who is, has flawed character or maybe a really abrasive personality can say something that's true and can say something that's false. That's why we have to assess ideas. That's
John, you said you're basically 10-year-olds. That's why I like watching your stream, because you show interesting content and you like a laugh as well. Like Tricky. Tricky's a funny bugger. Diane's a funny person. So, yeah, you enjoy a laugh. It's good to see.
Right. It's so important to not let, like, I see people do this all the time where they'll say, well, this person said this, but, they did this other thing. And you're like, okay, well, those are two different things.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And that doesn't, and because I agree with a point they made, doesn't mean I support this other thing that they did. And
John, I seen one of Biden in the White House, and he's leaning over a little girl, or a girl about 11 or 12, and the cameras pick up, the audio picks up what he says. And he literally says, do you know how horny I am to be standing behind a 12-year-old or whatever it was? I heard Joe Biden say that. Do you know how horny I am to be right behind you here now? And the little girl pulled this really weird face. She didn't like it.
But when we, as a culture, think that truth is just relative to a person's perspective, experience, environment, well, then the jerk that's saying things, you're not going to want to listen to anything he's saying because you're like, well, that's.
And John, what about Obama and Michelle Obama being a guy? What a massive deception to play on the American or on the world. So we're deep in a lies and deception here.
Just his perspective, and it's relative to his experience, and it can't be right.
Yep.
And that's just not how truth works.
That's one,
Right.
yeah.
And how easy is it to hear something that's you hear one thing that you strongly disagree with and it infuriates you, so you write off the person completely and anything they would ever say.
Yeah.
Because you didn't want it, you didn't like that one thing, true or not.
Mm-hmm.
You just forget them. They're useless. They have no. I'm not going to listen to anything they ever say again. And the problem is, if it's the truth they're saying, but it's how they're saying it that causes you to write them off, are you ever going to be able to hear? How do you know if you're ever going to be able to hear the actual truth?
Mm. Yeah, that's
I don't
good.
know.
Yeah.
So Nick thinks about these because he makes a good diplomat.
I'll never go into politics.
Nick knows how to.
Yeah, you would not succeed in politics, probably.
No.
Ha! He's a good diplomat because he doesn't say Biden. He says corrupt child sniffers. So that's so diplomatic. He doesn't actually say Biden.
You can make distinctions like that.
Yeah, at least without the guile to manipulate. That's but you gotta lay your head down at night.
Yeah, you gotta. How frustrating is?
Okay, guys, what about this? Barack Obama and Michelle Obama is in Australia right now, and they're in Sydney, and they're getting a police escort like he's a sitting president. There's a whole convoy, and all the traffic lights are turned off, and he just drives straight through as though he's still the president of the United States. And we've had other ex-presidents come here before, and they've never done that. So a lot of people think Obama's behind Biden, and the way we guys honoured him with the convoy and all that, maybe he is.
To hear someone that plays for the other political team
Mhm.
say something that's true, and you're like, you know what? I got to give them credit, and everyone on your team just completely thrashes you.
Oh yeah, they want
Yeah.
to whack-a-mole you.
Well,
Yeah.
it's because we've become so tribalistic now. People don't think for themselves. They look for the people that they trust. And I have to tell even my audience this all the time. Guys, don't just believe something because it's my opinion or because I say it. You have to test what I say. Make sure that I'm telling the truth. Make sure that what I say lines up with what's real. Because we have such a tendency, especially with social media, when something happens in culture, to go, oh, I wonder what this person is going to say about it, because they'll probably have the right view. And you don't know that they'll have the right view.
Yep.
And so we have to think for ourselves. And that's hard to do when we're so tribalistic in our social media lives, especially.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, and the tribalistic nature of Christianity or politics shuts so many people off. They're like, they self-segregate. They're like, yeah, I'm not gonna, like I have that, at work where, in fact, there's one person I work with who I'll probably send this interview to, who is a self-identified witch, and I thought of her when I was listening to your interview with witch. I can't remember her name.
Yeah, they murdered Isaac Cappy. They actually murdered him, and he knew it was coming.
Amy Davidson, yeah.
Amy Davidson, yes. And one thing that I was thinking about, I wanted to ask you about witchcraft, and really two things. One, why do you think witchcraft is, especially after having that interview, why do you think witchcraft is so prevalent and popular? And then also, how do you...
I was never here. There's worse photos of that on Hunter's laptop. There's photos of him with a child on his chest who's about 6 or 7 years old, and she's all painted up like a whore. And Hunter Biden's got his shirt off, he's laying down, and this Chinese kid is laying on his chest. I've literally seen it.
Reach those people in a way that you think they might be able to listen? How do you connect with them?
Yeah. Well, so witchcraft, as far as like Wicca and that whole world, is really one that I don't know a whole lot about. So that's one of the reasons I was excited to have Amy on, who is, she was one day from becoming a witch when she got saved, and the Lord brought her out of that. And so she really helped educate me and my audience about what Wicca even is. And I think one of the reasons it's so appealing to people is because it's so customizable. It's really just like a salad bar type of approach to spirituality, where you can, if you want, you do crystals, you do that. A few Bible verses you like, you can kind of cobble something together. And the other reason I think it's so appealing, especially to women, is one thing that I did not know this, but Amy shared with us, is that there's such strong feminist underpinnings to Wicca. So whereas Christianity and religions like Christianity are seen as authoritarian and, ruled by the patriarchy with males in charge of everything, along comes Wicca, where it's the divine feminine. It's the females that are, closer to the divine. I'm probably not saying it right, but you get the picture, where it's like a fully
Mel Gibson has exposed Hollywood as well. He said it's full of crazy Jews that drink blood and things like that. That's why they hate Mel Gibson now, because he called him out.
Dependent woman who has no male authority over her. And that's so appealing to a group of women who are being constantly indoctrinated by culture to believe that they are inherently oppressed by this patriarchy. And so there's a great appeal because it's so self-based, it's so self-made, and it's really just like the religion of self. And that's what a lot of people don't understand about Wicca, is it's actually not technically Satan worship. There's different views of deity within Wicca that Amy said, but it's generally not like what we think about when we think about Satan worship. It's really self worship, and so it's customizable and all that. And so the how to talk to somebody that's caught up in that, I guess that's something I'm probably still thinking through. I think a great resource for Christians in having conversations like that is a book called Tactics by Greg Koukl. And he even actually brings up in his book Tactics a conversation he had with a Wiccan, and how he was able to navigate that conversation by asking certain questions, placing those questions in well-placed, places in the conversation, and to keep things from getting hostile, but to really listen with curiosity to what the person is coming from, but then also to sort of, he says, put a pebble in their shoe to get them thinking about maybe some of their presuppositions and things like that. So it's, I think that's a good resource. Asking good questions is always a good way. Asking clarifying.
I was never here. I watched The Passion of the Christ, and it was completely biblical correct. I don't think he didn't do any blasphemy there. I know Mel Gibson was a Catholic, and then he's signed off onto a branch of Catholicism. I'm not sure what he follows, but his actual Passion of the Christ. Oh, hang on. He didn't show Christ rising from the dead, did he? Wow. The Passion doesn't show Christ rising from the grave. So there you go. Wow.
Questions when somebody says, I'm Wiccan. Well, my first question would be, well, what is that? Explain to me what you believe. Because we can make a whole bunch of assumptions about what we think they might believe. But listen with curiosity first, and then you can ask questions like, well, how did you conclude that that's the best way to do it? Or that, how did you conclude that that's true? Or what was your resources you use? What do you draw from for your knowledge? And just asking a lot of questions can be very helpful to even know how to begin to respond.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Well, I always.
And just so you know what I mean, Jesus Christ Superstar, I actually love that musical. I sing along with it and have a few beers and sing along like a tragic. But I'll admit, it ends with Christ dying on the cross. It doesn't show his resurrection. It says nothing at all. So if you knew nothing about Christ, you'd watch Jesus Christ Superstar and you'd see him die on the cross, and that's all you'd know. See, there's also Illuminati symbols in the one with Tim Minchin as Judas. There's Illuminati symbols I pick up all through it.
Just wonder about that because.
Oh, shut up, guys.
That person at work, she's super smart, and she came from a Christian background. So, which is often the case. A lot of these girls,
there's a lot of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the deconstruction world, there's a lot of Wicca.
Really?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's not uncommon at all.
Really? So that's interesting because I would figure that deconstruction leads to sort of a materialist atheist perspective, but it can lead more to like this spiritual Legos kind of thing.
It's spiritual Legos. Yeah. Deconstruction kind of breaks things down to a level of agnosticism.
Yeah.
Where you
deconstruction is really the only thing that's unified in the deconstruction movement is the starting point. But so people leave the starting point, but they land in all sorts of different places: atheism, agnosticism, Wicca, New Age, progressive Christianity, even other religions like it's more rare, but maybe Islam or something. But it's the unifying factor is that they are leaving biblical authority, leaving whatever they think evangelicalism is, which is often political stuff along with gospel stuff. So there's, in deconstruction, they think that teaching people they're sinners, that Jesus will judge them, that there's a place called hell. These are fearful, toxic doctrines that the church invented to keep people under control. And so as long as you leave that stuff, you can land anywhere you want to.
Has that current form of deconstructionism, has it been around for 70 years? Has it been around since the hippie movement? Does it predate? I'm sure in one form or another it's been around for thousands of years, obviously, because it seems like a very Luciferian tactic. I'm not going to hit the button. We have to, we have a button here that is me. Like I say Luciferian about like everything we ever talk about.
Yeah.
So
well, at least once an episode.
Yeah. So we'll do it on the interview. I'll spare you. But has that sort of thing been around for decades? I know that we talked about 2015 was kind of when things started to bubble up, but I don't know.
I think people have always been leaving the faith.
Okay, I think 2017, Revelation 12, that happened on the 23rd of September, the lady in the sky giving birth, I think that was the beginning of the time of sorrows. So we're now in the 2023, so we're nearly, because God does things in 7-year cycles, I think we're nearly out of the time of sorrows and about to head into tribulation.
That's a no-brainer. But I think the unique thing about, even going back to like the sophists, right? Plato came up with his explanation of the forms for, to solve other problems. But one of them was because the sophists were trying to ground morality in the self, and he wanted to ground it in an objective standard. I mean, I don't think he got there, but that was his goal. So, I mean, this type of idea of the gospel of self and rooting morality and these things in ourselves goes all the way back to the ancients. But I would say that what we see right now, this particular iteration of that being called deconstruction, really can be traced back to the 60s and the rise of postmodernism with philosophers like Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, mixing in with some Marxism and, Habermas and some of these guys. So I think that what we're seeing right now is primarily a product of that postmodern philosophy. Yeah. And people are sort of using that Derrida playbook. They may not realize it, and they may not say that they may never have read Derrida, but they're kind of doing his thing of he was the father of deconstruction. And one thing Derrida was real big on was sort of reading what's not written in the text. So you kind of read into the text what's not.
My accent, that's not a knife. Paul Hogan, Crocodile Dundee. That's not a knife.
Said. So,
real.
Yeah, so you see in the deconstruction movement, it's like, whereas we used to read the story of the Canaanite conquest through the eyes of the Israelites who were in relationship with Yahweh, because that's what the narrative, that's the story, it's their experience. But in deconstruction, it's like, oh, but what about the Canaanite babies? And it's like, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying we don't consider those things, and those aren't difficult things to think through, but the narratives get flipped into, who was oppressed or who was hurt or who was harmed. And like the whole thing gets read through that lens, which is a very postmodern thing. It's like, we're going to reject the meta narrative of this. We're going to look for what's not being said.
That exact reference happened in that ordination class.
Yeah.
And I remember bringing that home to mom and dad. And I mean, like, and it messed me up.
It's tough. And right. It is tough. If you've never wrestled with that, which I hadn't.
Yeah.
When I was a little girl and I read through the Bible, I read through that part and I was like, yay, go God, the Israelites won,
right,
victory.
Yeah.
I didn't think about it much more deeply than that. And so, the class caused me to really have to wrestle with that stuff. And
I saw a grown woman across from me, Lane was her name, and sweetheart, loved her. She was awesome. When we were reading through that and hearing the postmodernist version that was kind of being spun for us, just started weeping right there at the boardroom.
Yeah.
Just having, but it was a cumulative experience for her. And it was just like, I just feel like I'm losing my faith being here. I remember watching her say that across the, you have to be so careful.
Wow.
That was the thing. Like, sometimes I used to beat myself up because I used to think like, maybe I just wasn't mature enough for this. Maybe I couldn't handle it. But then you start like really digging into it and you think like, no, this is a pretty potent weapon that was being used, this, postmodernist look, at these sorts of things. Because when you flip the tables and you start thinking about, what if you're the Canaanites and you're just living your life, and then all of a sudden these spear-wielding savages come over the horizon,
Yeah, because that's how it's portrayed, is that, these sweet little Canaanites were just trying to live their lives.
Leaving their baskets,
Right. Yeah.
Sending their sheep. Well, but then, like, here's how funny God works. Like, 20 years later, we interviewed Gary Wayne, the Genesis 6 conspiracy guy, who has done, like, this massive, like, Mentat from Dune deep dive on the Nephilim and the bloodlines and, like, all this really cool stuff, And then you find out, like...
And, John, when Gary Wayne went on your channel, you were only like about 2,000 strong or whatever. You didn't have many subs. You're a lot more than me. But for a man of Gary Wayne's stature to come down to such a low subscribing channel, that shows how humble Gary is. I think Gary Wayne is a very great man of God.
Oh, wait, no. Those Canaanites were, like, throwing babies in the fire. And, they were actually
having sex
pretty...
with
Okay, Tricky, good night. Our daylight saving ends next week, so I'll be going an hour early on your time. Good night, mate. God bless.
Ritually having, sex with animals, and it was horrific.
Yeah.
And children, and
a couple of 100 subs. Yeehaw. What a gentleman.
Yeah.
Yeah, and whatever may or may not have happened to those children, age of accountability notwithstanding, like Nephilim DNA notwithstanding, It's a lot better than what would have happened to them if they grew up in that.
John, the stream you done before this, I forget what the guy's name was. The subject of the how old the Earth is come up, and you weren't sure how old the Earth is, and you were discussing things like the pyramids being 12,000 years old. The guy I'm going to show you now, 25 proofs the Earth is 6,000 years old. This ends all arguments. The Bible is correct. There was no pre-Adamic age of man. You watch and see, brother.
Society. Yeah.
Right. And but you know how unpopular it is to say that? I did a whole episode on the Canaanite conquest with a bio professor, Clay Jones, who's written extensively about it.
Really?
And he made that point. And oh my goodness, I mean, the vitriol from atheists and progressives on that. And just, you guys are the most vile, evil, wicked people that you would say something like that. And you're just thinking, I can see through a naturalistic lens that could be a vile thing to say.
Right.
But God, you know, the thing we fail to realize is that God begins all life and he ends all life.
Mm-hmm.
God essentially kills everyone. Every single person gets killed by God.
Yeah.
Whether you're 90 or 20. And, you know, I just think when we have that real temporal perspective, we can tend to see morality through that. And it's like, let's get a bigger perspective here. Let's get a bigger picture view.
What was the thing about the Tower of Babel that that we kind of touched on, maybe with Gary or maybe Derek? We've touched on it probably every time we've ever talked about the Tower of Babel. But like, it was a mercy that God extends.
Yeah.
You know, because especially if you look at, you know, the non-canonical extra biblical texts, you know, Jasher and Jubilee, how they're talking about how they want to split into 3 groups, and this group's going to kill the angels, and this group's going to take over the throne, and this group's going to kill God. You know, and God's plan is basically like, okay, you guys are trying to break into heaven to kill me. You know,
yeah, and you think about a couple chapters later what God does to Sodom and Gomorrah. That you know, that tool was in the toolkit.
John, that's what they're actually doing, trying to break into heaven to kill God. Wow, that's it in a nutshell.
Right.
Well, you know, chapters earlier with Babel, I mean, it was a mercy that it's like God just says, you know what, I'm just going to confound the languages.
Yeah. How about I just confuse you all? Just
And they went out and they had smart, you know, in a way, they went out and had smaller, closer knit communities because of it.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
I never thought about that either. Yeah.
Hey, if you guys have been enjoying this interview and you'd like to hear the rest of it, including some really down and dirty stuff that we're not allowed to say here on YouTube, head over to patreon.com/the Gosslings. We'd love to have your support.
I'm signing up to that Patreon account.
Support there and share exclusive content with you.
That's right. Keep it cool. And remember, these are interviews that strike down the dark.
They do indeed strike down the darkness. They strike down all the darkness.
That's right. Strike it down hard.
So hard.
Scheduled blocks of work.
Okay, guys, that was interesting. It's good to hear a person that's not, she didn't do, look up Matthew 12:6. She just spoke from her heart, and she made a lot of sense. Very impressed. Okay, this proves the Earth is only 25,000 years old. 6,000 years old. Listen to me. Read it. There it is.
First of all, you have to understand that they have no proof for this whatsoever. The various theories of evolution declare that the Earth and the universe are billions of years old. Evolutionists say that we are just the result of a cosmic accident, that we are just thinking animals without specific design or purpose. In school, most of us were taught that life began by random chance chemical reactions.
That's funny,
When we see the
John.
beauty of the Earth, we see
G'day,
the
Barry.
complexity
Good
of
to
the
see
living
you, mate.
organisms that occupy it. Can we really believe that this is all just an accident? Throughout the world, we are presented with the evidence that calls into question evolutionary beliefs and the assumption of an old age for the Earth and the universe. Over the course of this program, we will present to you evidence that will shake the foundations of the evolutionary worldview. Evolutionists say that the Earth is, in fact, millions and billions of years old. First of all, you have to understand that they have no proof for this whatsoever. They simply claim it. And you have to realize that evolutionists live and die by 8 words. Those 8 words are so important that you should memorize them. So I want you to try memorizing these words. Please repeat after me. Give me enough time. Give me enough time. And anything can happen. And anything can happen. Those are the 8 words by which evolutionists...
Okay, he does deliver this in a kind of arrogant way, but just ignore his arrogance. He's trying to be funny. He comes across arrogant, though. Just ignore that, though.
Live and die. We might call it the evolutionary mantra. You see, in spite of anything and everything you can show an evolutionist that evolution is not true, they will simply respond by saying, give me enough time and anything can happen. So the question must be, has there ever been enough time? Now, I was once asked to write an article for a publication. When you're asked to write articles for publications, sometimes they give you the title of the article and say, we want you to write it. Sometimes they say, pick your own title and write the article. And I was given the title. The title was to be, how do you date a rock? And my first response was, first you have to ask her. Well, some of you got it anyway.
Ha! Ha! That's such a dad joke. Oh, man.
So, I mean, let's think about this. Is there anything about a rock that will tell you how old it is? Is there anything about the size, feel, shape, smell, taste, weight, mass, specific gravity, density, chemical composition? Is there anything about a rock that will tell you how old it is? And of course, the answer is no. There's absolutely nothing about a rock that will tell you how old it is. As a matter of fact, I can go outside right now, pick up any rock I choose to. I can claim any age I want to for it. You may disagree with me, but you cannot prove me scientifically incorrect. You understand? I can go outside right now, pick any rock I want to, claim any age I want to for it. You may disagree with me, but you cannot scientifically prove that I'm wrong. I mean, think with me. When you go outside and pick up rocks, do they come with little white strings attached, little white tags saying, I'm 10 million years old and signed by a scientist who was there at the time? Excuse me? No. So let's think about this. Is there any way in which you can date a rock? The answer is no. There's no way that you can date a rock. And so what we want to talk about is, are the Earth and the universe really billions of years old, or are they, in fact, young? Now, people will say, well, you know, the Earth is old. It was all came from a Big Bang. Supposedly this Big Bang occurred some perhaps 20 billion supposed years ago. But is the Earth and the universe really 20 billion years old, or can you really trust the Bible to tell you the truth that it was created just 6,000 years ago? Now, you say a young Earth, young universe, and people will say, but wait, doesn't it have to be old? Because, and they will say things like, doesn't it take millions of years for rocks to form or for diamonds to form? What about stalactites and stalactites to form? What about polar ice caps to form? What about thousands of feet of rock layers to form? I mean, doesn't that take millions and billions of years? Or what about deep canyons to be cut into rock layers? What about dinosaur fossils to form? Doesn't that take millions of years? Or perhaps, say, coal. Doesn't it take millions of years for coal to form? Or wood to fossilize? And the big one always is, doesn't it take millions and billions of years for light to reach us from distant stars? I mean, that's the big one that everybody asks. But I say it all has to be young. I say it all has to be young because... Now, I always like to start with something for the ladies. Now, ladies, this is a piece of opal mineral rock. This is dug by hand from Australia. And that's a nice stone, right? Oh, come on, ladies, that's a nice rock, right?
For an opal, yeah.
Now, that's a piece of natural opal from Australia. This is a piece of man-made opal from Australia. Under an electron scanning microscope, you can't tell the difference. But this artificial man-made opal was grown in that jar right there. Have I got your attention?
Yep.
You see, this is a natural piece of opal stone mined in Australia by hand. We want to take a look at, does it take millions of years for gemstones like opals and diamonds to form? And what about gold to form? Well, this is a natural piece of opal. This is a man-made piece of opal. It was grown in this jar right here. You can actually see it growing right there in that lens. And it only took 3 months. Have I got your attention? You put the right chemicals in a jar, stick it up on a shelf, and it can grow an opal in 3 months. I want to assure everybody here, if you have opal jewelry, it's real. This gentleman...
I always thought opal was fossilized bones of dinosaurs, but probably maybe not.
Is a Christian, a creation-believing scientist. He only does this as a laboratory experiment, but he's found out how to do it. But he doesn't sell them. He doesn't put them on the market. He doesn't flood the market with these things. But it only takes 3 months to get an opal. Or how about that rock right there? Come on, ladies, that's a nice rock. Oh, come on, that's the Hope Diamond in the Smithsonian. That's a nice rock, right? But everyone should say it takes millions of years to form diamonds. Now, first of all, though, you really know that that's not true, because if you think about it, you know that we've been able to make industrial-grade diamonds for many, many years. It takes a few months. We simply subject carbon to heat, pressure, and so forth. But these are crude diamonds in the sense that they're not gem quality diamonds. They are diamonds, but they're only used for abrasives and grinding and so forth. But are you aware that in 2003, we found out how to make pure, super hard diamonds in only a matter of minutes?
We're going to refocus.
Now, it takes high pressure and high temperatures, but it only takes a matter of minutes to get gem quality pure diamonds. Are you impressed? Well, think with me for a moment. You know how scientists are. If we learn how to do something, well, then the next question for scientists is, how do you do it faster or cheaper or both, right? So the very next year, we found out how to do it at much lower temperatures, much lower pressures, and it only takes 12 hours. Is this interesting? Oh. Well, but you know how it is with scientists. If you learn how to do something, the next question is, how do you do it cheaper or faster or both, right? Well, in 2006, we found out how to make flawless, pure diamonds, up to 10 carats. Wow. It only takes 1 day. Today in the United States, you can go into a jewelry store, you can buy a diamond, you can either...
Wow, 10 carat gem class diamond, and they can make it in 10 hours. Wow.
Pay for a natural diamond, or you can get a man-made diamond. They're of equal quality. And the man-made diamond is cheaper, and you now have a choice. And let's think about this. We now know that kimberlites, which are what you find diamonds in, actually come up from deep inside the earth at about 9 miles an hour. It only takes about 12 to 30 hours for this material to come to the surface of the earth. We found that out in 2000. And this is another report, 1999, showing that, again, it only takes about 2 to 8 hours for these materials to come to the surface of the earth. So I guess it really doesn't take millions of years to get a diamond. Is that correct? Have I got your attention? Well, what about gold? I mean, doesn't it take a long time for gold to form in nature? Well, actually, no. The massive Lahore gold deposits in Papua New Guinea could have formed in, quote, as short as 5 hours, unquote, claims geologist Greg Hall. That's January of 2007. Here, in a report that actually goes back to 1985, water sample from over half a mile down by these geochemists contained, quote, 1,000 times the highest concentration of gold ever recorded in the surface waters of hydrothermal systems, unquote. But this was found at a geothermal power plant in New Zealand back in 1985. Today, we now think that there's approximately 53 pounds of gold being deposited in this gold mine while it's being mined. Well, 53 pounds of gold is not shabby, right? And what about stalactites, stalagmites? I mean, doesn't that take millions and millions of years to form? I mean, Think with me for a moment. When you go to places, the caves and limestone caves that have stalactites, stalagmites, don't they say to you, oh, it takes 10, 20 million years to get a cave like this? Is that right?
Yep.
And the other thing they say is, don't touch that. Right? Come on, I say, don't touch that. It'll take 1,000 years to grow back, right? Well, I'd like to see if it really does
Hi, James. Good to see you, mate.
take 10, 20 million years to get a limestone cave.
Yeah, vast. They found dinosaur T-Rex bones with wet tissue in it, red wet tissue.
Like this. I'd like to see if you touch it, does it really take 1,000 years to grow back? Now, we're looking at do stalactites and stalagmites form slowly or fast? Now, this is a photograph of some Mayan pottery made in the Americas. We know it was made about 700 AD. But in this photograph, you'll notice right
Trying
here,
to get
this
it
is
to
the
focus.
stalagmite coming up from on top of the pottery. Is that correct? So let's think. Here's
not
this
focusing.
stalagmite on top of the pottery, so that means it formed in less than 1,300 years. Is that right? So if it only takes 1,300 years for this stalagmite to form, I really don't think it takes 10, 20 million years, do you? Not really. There you go. Or how about this? Now, this comes from Australia. This is a man-made tunnel. We might call it a man-made cave. It was dug 160 feet deep into a basaltic or volcanic hill in Australia in 1857. But here you see this beautiful flowstone. Here you see these stalactites coming from the ceiling. Now, let's think. This photograph was taken in 1997, so it only took 140 years for these formations to form. So I don't really think it takes 10, 20 million years to get a limestone cave. How about you? Come on, can y'all say not a chance? A little louder. Not a chance. Very good. And evolutionists will tell you, well, the polar ice caps contain perhaps a quarter million years of accumulated ice and snow and so forth. As a matter of fact, they will tell you that you can see the little lines in the polar ice caps. They'll say, you can see 200, 220,000 lines there and so forth. First of all, that's not true. It's actually a lie. I want you to think with me for just a moment. How many of you have opened up a refrigerator freezer door and you've seen two ice cubes flowing together in the middle of the freezer? Is that right? Oh. Now, it's true that you can see these little lines near the surface, the top, and even down into the middle, but once you get down the...
John, I'll send the link to you on Gmail, brother. I'll send it to you on Gmail.
Well, the pressure of the ice is so great that those lines simply become invisible, and after that it's just, subjective judgment and so forth. And they'll tell you that these little lines in the polar ice caps, those are just like annual rings in a tree. You cut down a tree, you count the rings, They'll say, oh, well, you can see 200, 220,000 lines. They're just like tree rings and so forth. So this tells us that the polar ice caps are 220,000, years old. But I don't think so. I mean, when I was an evolutionist, I used to accept that kind of thing, but I don't believe it anymore. Let me show you why. Now, this is a Boeing B-17 medium-range bomber from World War II. This is a Lockheed P-38 fighter from World War II. In 1942, two bombers escorted by 6 fighter planes left the United States to go to England as a part of the war effort in World War II. Now, these planes cannot fly directly across the Atlantic. They don't have nearly enough fuel. And so what they must do is they have to fly first to Bangor, Maine. From Bangor, Maine, they fly to Newfoundland. From Newfoundland, they fly to Greenland. From Greenland on to Iceland and on down to England. Now, these 8 planes took off from the U.S. in 1942. They got to Greenland, and they fueled up on the west coast of Greenland. They started across the polar ice cap of Greenland, ran right smack into a snowstorm. This was a complete whiteout. They couldn't go forward. They tried to turn around, find the base they came from, couldn't find the base they came from. They decided they were going to have to crash land on top of the polar ice cap. Now, the first plane went in with its wheels down, flipped over. Everybody said, that's a bad idea. So the other 7 planes came in with the wheels up and just belly landed. Now, after the storm was over, the crews were rescued, but the planes were left there because it was much cheaper, much faster to just build new planes back in 1942. But in 1988, some enterprising American men remembered that those planes were up there, and there's a lot of money in antique aircraft, especially military. And so they decided to go up and get these planes you know, rehabilitate them and so forth, make some money. And so they took brooms and shovels up there to find these planes. Now you have to understand, these planes are not heavy enough to sink into the ice. Wherever they landed is where they stayed. Okay, so they crash landed in 1942. Planes stay exactly where they landed. Well, it's only been 46 years. Anybody want to guess, tell me how many inches, or if you prefer feet, of ice and snow they found on top? Anybody? I mean, it's only been 46 years. How much ice and snow do you think they found? 20 feet. Thank you. I have an opening bid of 20. Do I have another bid? 10. Okay, we have a bid of 10 feet, 20 feet. I'll take one more bid. 50 feet. Oh, my goodness. Well, I have to stop the bidding because all of you are just a little low. You see, what we actually found was 250. In 46 years, 250 feet of ice and snow had formed on top of the plains. This is a picture of Glacier Girl as she looked when found 250 feet below the surface.
Wow.
They had to come back. They couldn't find the planes. They took back the brooms and shovels, came back with sonar and radar that would penetrate the ice, finally found the planes 250 to 270 feet below the surface.
Wow.
They actually had to come back with heavy equipment, bore these big holes all the way down 250 feet. They've actually disassembled her, brought her back up in pieces, reassembled her. She's one.
No, James, you won yesterday was fine. I'm only joking, mate.
A few flying P-38s in the world today. So let's think. It only took 46 years for 250 feet of ice and snow to pile up on top. That's 5.4 foot per year. Is that correct? I don't think those little lines in the polar ice caps are annual rains. I don't think those are years. I think those little lines are individual storms. That would be much more reasonable, wouldn't it? Oh. Now, this is a picture of the Upper Grand Canyon of Arizona. And here you see hundreds and hundreds of layers of rock, right? I mean, it's a beautiful area. Now, evolutionists would tell you that these layers could span millions and millions, even hundreds of millions of years. But I would like you to think about it something for just a second. First of all those layers you see here are sedimentary rock. Now, what is sedimentary rock? Well, it comes from the word sediment, correct? So if I had a glass of water here and I threw dirt and sand into the water, whatever settles to the bottom would be called sediment, correct?
Yep.
So sedimentary rock is water deposited rock. You remember from school, there's only three kinds of rock: igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary. All these layers of rock you see here are sedimentary rock. What you really see here are just layers of dried out mud. That's everything you see here. These are just layers of dried out mud. And I say it takes just 1 year to cut that canyon. That these are just the wet mud layers laid down by the flood of Noah, that this whole canyon was cut in just 1 year. Now, of course, you could argue with that. Let's just take a look at it. This is a picture of the south wall of the Grand Canyon taken at sunrise from several miles away. This is the Colorado River. Now, when you see these layers, you see hundreds and hundreds of layers here. Is that correct? But they're all layers of dried out mud. Now, if you were to believe that all these layers came from individual floods, you would have to believe that about 1,000 floods of roughly equal depth occurred one after the other exactly the same way, covering hundreds of thousands of square miles. Now, does that even seem acceptable? That's a little tough, right? And I'd like you to think about something with me for a minute. A good scientist always asks two questions. The first question is, what's there? Meaning, when I make a scientific observation, I have to adequately and accurately describe what is present, what is there. But the second and more important question in science is, what is not there? You often learn more by asking the second question than the first. Now, let's ask ourselves the two most important questions in science concerning the Grand Canyon here. What is there? Well, we have hundreds and hundreds of layers of dried out mud. Now, think with me for a second. If each of those layers was laid down by an individual flood, then there would have to be some time for each layer to be exposed before the next layer was deposited on top, correct? Right? If it's one at a time, you know, one layer's, then there's a time of exposure, then a second layer, time of exposure, and a third layer, right? Now, if that were true, if each of these layers here seem flat, although they're not flat, they actually undulate and they twist and turn and meet each other at a 90-degree angle. And if you go to the north side of the canyon, and you go up the North Kaibab Trail, there's a place where you can actually see one kind of sedimentary rock completely surrounded by another kind, like a donut, but the donut is surrounded by the kind of dried out mud that's in the middle. Well, if each of these layers is supposed to represent different ages, that each one was laid down, there was a period of time of exposure between the next layer being laid on top, then please tell me, why are there no soil horizons between the rock layers? I mean, if the rock layers have been exposed, we would expect some weathering, we would expect some of the rock to turn into soil, is that correct?
Yep.
But there's no soil horizons between the layers. Why are there no V-shaped erosion marks in the layers? I mean, think with me for a minute. If you have a layer deposited, rain falls, starts to etch a V-shaped erosion mark into the layer, then the next layer comes in, is going to fill that in, it's going to preserve it, is that correct? But there are no V-shaped erosion marks in these layers. There are no animal holes, there are no root holes. That's all missing. So what does that tell you? It tells you that all of those layers of dried out mud occurred in one year by a big flood called the Flood of Noah. And because there's no soil horizons, V-shaped erosion marks, animal holes, or root holes in the layers, it proves they were all deposited at one time. Now, there are evolutionists who rely heavily upon radiometric dating processes to determine the age of a rock. Now, understand, anytime I use a big word, I always want to define what it means. What does the word radiometric mean? Well, it means the use of radioactive materials to supposedly measure the amount of time since an event has occurred or a creature lived. You've all heard of carbon-14. Maybe you've heard of uranium, lead, potassium, argon, rubidium, strontium. There's all kinds of these, but carbon-14, potassium, argon, rubidium, strontium, uranium, lead, those are the ones that most people know of. Actually, there's over 80 of them. And they say that you can date a rock, millions, billions of years old using these radiometric dating processes. However, that's not true. First of all, none of them work. Not one of them works. Carbon-14 doesn't work. Even the man who invented it, Dr. Libby, admitted it didn't work. But none of them work. First of all, none of them work because they all start with 5 false assumptions, and carbon-14 has 7 false assumptions. Now, would you agree with me that if you have a dating technique based on 5 false assumptions or 7 false assumptions, then you're not going to be able to get a reliable date? Is that correct? I mean, that's right. You also have to remember that in the case of carbon-14, that the Flood of Noah would drastically change the carbon cycle, so that really throws it off. And then would you agree with me on something? If these things actually worked, if they did, and you could use 2 different methods on the same rock, wouldn't you expect them to be approximately the same date? About the same age and so forth. Is that right? I mean, agreed? If you could use 2 different ones on the same rock, if they work, they should be about the same, right? Okay. How about if I was within 10%? Would that be satisfactory? I'm willing to negotiate. What do you want, 15%? 10, okay, well, I got 10's enough, okay. Well, good. Well, here's the problem, you see, not only do these methods not work, there are major contradictions between different dating methods used on the same rock. For example, this is Sunset Crater National Monument. It is south and east of the Grand Canyon in Arizona. It's a relatively small volcano, it's beautiful though. It gets the name Sunset because the cinders at the top just glow at sunset. Now, anybody who knows anything about Arizona, New Mexico, that part of the United States would know that there's a large number of Indian ruins in this area. As a matter of fact, there are Indian ruins right in the park area. And so let's think. We know that this eruption can be dated at about 900 years ago. We can do that by tree ring countings because 900 is not a big deal. And we know that there were Native American Indians living in the area. First of all, there were remains of their houses and so forth there. And also, in the cinder cones, in the lava flows, from this eruption, we found Native Indian artifacts. So we know there were people living there at the time that the eruption occurred, and some of their artifacts were trapped in the material from this eruption. So there were Native Indian artifacts found in the lava flows and cinder cones. Now, this is volcanic rock. Now, when it comes to volcanic rock, the method of choice here would be the potassium-argon method of dating. And so we potassium-argon dated some of this material, And the laboratory that did the work came up with the data of 210 to 230,000 years old. I think that's more than 10%. Am I right here? Oh. Or what about this rock? This comes from Australia. This is a piece of volcanic rock from an eruption in Australia. Inside the rock, when we cut it open, we found this burned wood. It's really charcoal. So let's think. This volcano erupted. The rock completely surrounded a piece of wood. There's no question there's no contamination here. The rock completely sealed the wood inside. Now, the heat of the lava caused the wood to burn. And so we were left with basically charcoal inside the rock and the lava rock on the outside. Now, of course, since this is charcoal, you would use the carbon-14 dating technique. And the rock is volcanic, so you would use the potassium-argon technique. Now, understand, please, I don't agree with these dates. You do understand that. I believe the Earth and the universe are 6,000 years old. However, the laboratories that did the dates got for the carbon-14 date on this wood an age of 45,000 years old. Now, again, I don't agree with it, but that's what they got. The lab that did the potassium argon date on the piece of lava got a date of 37 million. I think I see a problem here. I think that's more than 10%. Am I right here? Oh. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm particularly proud of this particular one, so I want you to take careful attention. Let's go back to your 1801, Hu'alili, Hawaii, on the big island of Hawaii. Now, you know the Hawaiian Islands are just volcanoes that stick out of the water, right? So I want you to think about this. So the volcanoes of the Hawaiian Islands are just coming up from the ocean floor, sticking out of the water here, 2.6 miles and higher here. But here are these volcanoes in the Hawaiian Islands. Now, in 1801, there was an eruption of one of these volcanoes, and the lava flowed from the top of the mountain, down the side of the mountain, into the ocean water, went all the way down the side of the volcano, all the way down to the ocean floor, 2.6 miles down. Okay? Now, people were there to see this eruption occur in 1801. Now, I'm kind of proud of this, so I want you all to pay close attention to this. Okay, are you ready? Come on, are you ready? Okay. In 1801, there was an eruption. You missed it, didn't you? Come on, I'll show it to you one more time, okay? In 1801, there was an eruption. Now, you're also supposed to say, ooh. See, I'll show you one more time. See, in 1801, there was an eruption. Ooh. There you go. Well, we got the bright idea. Let's send a robot down and test this lava flow for the age using the potassium argon method. So
I told you these jokes are pretty bad.
We sent a robot down. It went down 0.8 of a mile, got a 0 million years old. Now, first of all, that is correct, because think with me for a second. It was only 200-year-old material. Potassium argon is not good on hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands. It's only good on millions. And so if this material is only 200 years old, then 0 million is correct. Everybody with me here? We got the bright idea, though. Let's take the robot. Let's go down 2 miles. Took a sample, got a potassium argon date of 12 million years. Said, well, that's interesting. Let's send the robot all the way down to the ocean floor, 2.6 miles down. Took a sample, got a potassium argon date of 21 million. I think I see a problem here. How about you? These methods do not work. None of them work. They all start with 5 false assumptions or 7 false assumptions, and none of them work. Well, let's go on. This is my favorite kind of fossil. Now, my favorite kind of fossil is called a polystrate fossil. Now, again, when I use a big word, I always like to explain what it means. All of you would know the word poly means many, correct? Now, straight, strat, stratum, this all refers to layers. And so a polystrate fossil is any fossil which penetrates through 2 or more layers of the fossil record. Now, they are usually tree trunks, but they're often bone. But any fossil that penetrates through 2 or more layers of the fossil record, they are usually tree trunks, but they are often bone. Now, here you see in this photograph from Australia, many, many layers. Is that correct? Everybody see the polystrate tree trunk? Well, if you can't, it's right there. But what's particularly interesting about it is this. First of all, it's not petrified, it's coalified. This is a tree trunk turned to coal, but you'll notice it has no roots and no tops. It's just a log. Is that correct? Kind of tells you it didn't grow there, doesn't it? Well, let's think about this. How did coal form anyway? I mean, how many of you remember being taught in school the old swamp theory of coal formation? They used to teach us in school back, when I was in grade school. They used to say, oh, there were forests and swamps covering the earth 360 million, suppose, years ago at the time of the Carboniferous period, that these trees grew up in these swamps and they fell over and died, and they built up in the water of the swamp. And because there's so little oxygen in the swamp water, the trees piled up one on top of the other. And that's how we got coal. Does that sound at all familiar? But nobody teaches that anymore, at least not any honest evolutionist, because they all know it's not true. You see, first of all, let's take a little look. Here, you see some small coal layers or coal seams. Is that correct? But first of all, think with me. Do you notice it's flat on the bottom and flat on the top? Is that correct? So first of all, does anybody here see roots coming down from below these layers? No roots. It's flat on the top, flat on the bottom. Number two, you only find natural gas, coal, and natural oil between layers of sedimentary rock. Now, what is sedimentary rock? That's layers of dried out mud. Is that correct? So you only find natural gas, natural coal, natural oil between layers of dried out mud or some kind of sandstone. But there's something else here too. Notice right here. See how this coal seam forks right here at the fork right there? And once they started realizing that, they started realizing the swamp theory simply wasn't true, and they stopped teaching it altogether. Now, this is a pure layer of anthracite coal. Now, anthracite coal is the hardest, densest, blackest, bestest coal there is. Anthracite coal is the really good stuff. Now, this comes from our state of Michigan. But this is about 1.5 to 2 foot thick layer of pure anthracite coal, the really good stuff. Now, let's think. To get anthracite coal, you have to have 10-foot thick layer of plant and wood deposits compressed down to 10 to 1. Okay, so it takes 10 feet of material compressed to 1 foot to get hard anthracite coal. Now, if you take 10 feet and you compress it maybe 3 to 1, you get soft coals like lignites, and 5 to 1, you'll get soft coal. Maybe down to 5, 7 to 1, you'll get bituminous coals and so forth. But it takes 10 to 1 compression ratio to get anthracite coal. However, in our state of Utah, we have a pure layer of anthracite coal 200 foot thick. Now that tells you there had to be a layer of logs and vegetable material 2,000 foot thick there at some time in the past to be compressed down to 200. Is that correct? I would suggest you only a worldwide flood could do that. A layer of logs and wood, 2,000 foot thick, all in one place, all at one time, would require a worldwide flood. And this is a bell found in 1944 in medium grade coal in our state of West Virginia, but the coal is supposedly 300 million years old. Oh, it's a very unique alloy and has a iron clapper on it and so forth. But this is a pre-flood bell used between creation 6,000 years ago and the flood of Noah by somebody, and trapped in the coal from the flood. And doesn't it take millions of years for fossils to form? I mean, I grew up on the campus of the University of California, Berkeley. Now, I did that because my father was a student at Berkeley. He got his degrees at Berkeley. He went on to become a professor at Berkeley, at one time a secretary to the president. And I actually grew up on the campus of the University of California, Berkeley. Now, that's the bad news. Here's the good news. The good news is that when I was not in the California public school system learning evolution in elementary school, well, I was in the paleontology laboratories at the University of California, Berkeley, learning about dinosaurs, fossils, and evolutionary theory from PhDs when I was just in elementary school. I learned about this so well that by the time I hit the 3rd and 4th grade, they used to borrow me from one class to the other. And I used to teach the other children about fossils, dinosaurs, and evolutionary theory because I knew more about it than the teachers did. That's an absolutely true story. Now, they taught me back in those days at Berkeley that it takes millions and millions of years to get fossils. They told me that dinosaurs, been dead for 65 to 70 up to 150 million supposed years. But I don't believe that anymore. I don't. And here's why. They say it takes millions and millions of years for a fossil to form. Is that correct? Right? Well, let me show you a fossil. This is kind of an interesting fossil. It's called a Teddybearosaurus. Now, this Teddybearosaurus fossilized, it only took 4 months. This was formed along the Thames River in England. There's a place where they have this overhang and a walkway underneath, and it's limestone rock. And there's water that comes over the limestone rock along the Thames River there, and people actually walk along underneath, and they tie tennis shoes and teddy bears and other things, Coca-Cola bottles, on long strings, and they come back, and 4 months later they have a fossil. You're not impressed? Well, how about this fossil? This is a coil of man-made rope, but this fossilized in only 2 weeks. Are you impressed?
Yep.
Well, if you're not impressed yet, how about this? I think you'll agree that is a fossilized fish. Is that correct? But this fossil fish is quite interesting. You see, according to the evolutionists who found it, it died and was fossilized in less than 5 hours. Oh, yeah. You see, this comes from Brazil. The Santana Formation was reported in 1989, but we found fossil fish with fossil gills, fossil muscles, fossil stomachs. The evolutionist paleontologist who found it did not allow his theory to get in the way of a good scientific observation. I applaud him for that. I really do. I really do. And he said this, quote, "What is clear is that the fossilization process took place moments after the fish died and was completed within only a few, probably less than 5 hours," unquote. But he went on to say this, in this case, quote, "Instantaneous fossilization," unquote, "is suspected to have been the very cause of death." Did you get that? DOA, fossil. This evolutionist paleontologist was making a valid scientific observation. I do applaud him for this. He was being honest. He didn't let his theory get in the way of his, observation. And he made a good scientific observation. What he said was, based upon what he found, the cause of death might well have been fossilization. So I guess it doesn't take millions of years to get a fossil. Is that right? Oh. And then we have helium missing from the Earth's atmosphere. Helium is made in the crust of the Earth by the decay of radioactive material. It's the only way helium is basically made on Earth. Now, let's think about this. It's produced by the decay of radioactive materials like uranium in the crust of the Earth. Now, when that helium is made in the crust of the Earth by the decay of radioactive materials, it leaks out through the rock because it's an inert gas. It won't combine with anything else. It leaks out of the rock and into the atmosphere. Now, it is not lost into outer space. As a matter of fact, we actually get a slight addition of helium to the Earth's atmosphere by cosmic winds, but it's not lost into space. So whatever helium has been made on Earth is still basically here. The problem is this. Though it escapes in the atmosphere and stays here, there's only enough for the atmosphere to be less than 2 million years old. Now I would find it problematic to have an Earth that was 4.6 billion years old, but an atmosphere that was less than 2 million. How about you? And here, there's too much salt in the Dead Sea. Now here's a satellite photograph of Israel. Here's the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, the Dead Sea here. But the Dead Sea has too much salt in it for it to be old. The north end today is 31% salt, the south end 37% salt. This is why you can't drown in it unless you strap on about 500 pounds of lead weights. But think with me for just a moment. All of this salt would actually accumulate in less than 13,000 years. But evolutionists will tell you that the Jordan River Valley, this volcanic rift valley that we have here, they will say it is anything from 5 to 10 up to 20 million years old. But think with me for just a second. If, in fact, the Dead Sea were, and the Jordan River Valley were 5, 10, 20 million years old, well, that means that the Jordan River flowing into the Dead Sea would have to be cleaner than distilled water for 20 million years. Anybody here ever seen the Jordan River? It's not that clean, right? So this is what we call a regional geochronometer. But it simply shows that this is not 5, 10, 20 million years old. It's less than 13,000 and totally acceptable with only 6,000, or in fact 4,500, which is from the time of Noah's flood. I'm sure you've also all noticed that the moon is moving away, right? You all have noticed the moon is moving away, right? Where are your powers of observation, people? The moon is moving away from the Earth at a staggeringly fast rate. Come on, are you all ready to be staggered? Come on, are you all ready to be staggered? Well, the moon is moving away at a staggeringly fast rate. It's moving away at 2 inches a year.
The Red Sea's fish are being restocked now naturally, James. That's interesting you said that.
Come on, 2 inches a year. Aren't you staggered? You're not? Well, you should be. Think with me for just a second. Today, you don't have to believe me. Today, you can prove this in a laptop computer, desktop computer at home or the office. The moon is moving away at 2 inches per year. Now, do any of you remember something called the law of gravity? Come on, you all do remember something called the law of gravity, right? And the law of gravity says basically that as two objects get closer together, there's a stronger and stronger pull together. Is that right? Now, it's an inverse square law. You half the distance, you quadruple the force, and so forth. But you plug the formula into a laptop computer today, and you can prove to yourself, think with me, if the moon is moving away at 2 inches per year now, well, if I go back 1 year, it would be 2 inches closer, correct? Another year would be 2 inches closer. But as the moon starts to come back towards the Earth, well, then the force of gravity starts to increase. Is that correct? And the rate at which the moon comes back gets faster and faster, correct? Now, again, as I said, you can prove this in a laptop computer, that if you go back in time, the moon would come back in, spiral in, and hit the Earth 1.4 billion years ago. Now, evolutionists say that the Earth and the moon are the same age. They say they're 4.5 to 5 billion supposed years old. Most of them say 4.6 billion. But if evolutionists were telling the truth, then that would mean that the moon was attached to the Earth for the first 3.6 billion years. Is that correct? And then it has been moving away ever since. Have I got that right? Hello? Now, there's something else I want you to notice here. Did you notice the bouncing arrow? And did you notice down here, I'm going from the age of the Earth at 4.6 billion, and it's getting younger. So did everybody see that now? I want you to, okay, right, here's the bouncing arrow. And then the age of the Earth gets younger. So, is that cool? Oh, come on, that was neat, right? Thank you. We want to keep watching these bouncing arrows. You also want to keep, watching the bouncing arrows and the age of the Earth getting younger down here, okay? Just kind of keep that in mind as you're watching slides. Well, let's think about this too. If the moon comes back towards the Earth and the force of gravity gets in, ever larger, well, what's it going to do? Well, what is the major physical impact of the moon upon the Earth? It is tides, correct? Now, if the moon starts to come back towards the Earth, well, let's think about this. If the moon comes back towards the Earth, the tides would get higher and higher, correct? Right? Now, if you go back 1/2 billion years, and again, just on a laptop computer, well, the tides on Earth would rise 1 mile high.
James, he makes good points, doesn't he?
Twice a day. I think my first question would be, do you know how to breathe underwater? And keep in mind, if the tides rise 1 mile twice a day, just in your mind start thinking about erosion for just a minute, okay? Now, another argument that evolutionists use, supposing that the universe is, well, millions and billions of years old, they say it takes millions and billions of years for light to travel here from distant stars, distant galaxies. Is that correct? Now, I'd like to ask everybody a question. How many of you were taught, as I was, the speed of light is a constant? Come on, in school, they taught us the speed of light is a constant, right? 186,000 miles a second, 300,000 kilometers a second. Is that correct? But how many of you know that's not true? The speed of light is not a constant. As a matter of fact, if you're looking for this material, I have it on my website in a free article you can just download. And I'm citing mostly evolutionary scientists. But the fact of the matter is, the speed of light is not a constant. You see, these are just some of the citations of work done in the last few years. But we've actually been able to measure the speed of light slowing down since 1675, when Romer made the first measurements of the speed of light. an accurate way. But research done in the last 10 years has been able to actually accelerate light, decelerate light, and even stop it and start it again. Now, if you can speed it up, slow it down, stop it, and start it again, would you agree with me it's not a constant? Is that right? Oh. Now, I will point out, too, here, the creation astronomer, Dr. Barry Sutterfield of Australia, using one method of scientific approach in astronomy, and Dr. Trotsky, who is from Nizhny Novgorod, Russia, which is my sort of headquarters in Russia. I always go to Russia twice a year. I've been there 28 times and so forth. But he is an atheist, but he's an astronomer working in Russia in Nizhny Novgorod, and Dr. Sutterfield working in Australia, one a creationist, one an evolutionist, and using two totally different methods of scientific proof, have come to the same conclusion. Both of them conclude that at one time recently, the speed of light may well have been 10 million times faster than today. Now, if the speed of light were 10 million times faster than today at sometime in the recent past, I think that would drastically change your idea of how long it takes light to get here from distant objects. Is that correct? I think so too. And I'm sure you've all noticed that the galaxies are rotating too fast. Is that right? Come on, you had noticed, right? You hadn't noticed? Where are your powers of observation, people? Yeah. Now, not all galaxies rotate, but there are two kinds of galaxies specifically that do rotate. And when we take a look at these rotating galaxies, it doesn't matter how far across the universe.
James, a lot of people, like now you see TV, they believe in a pre-Adamic world. They're not trusting the Bible. The Bible says 6,000 years old, and it's literal. If God says it's 6,000 years old, it's 6,000 years old. There's not 12,000-year-old pyramids or sphinxes. That's not how it works. This guy has proven 100% the whole universe is 6,000 years old.
First, we see they're rotating too fast. Evolutionists call this the winding up dilemma. They've known about it for over 60 years. But it doesn't matter how far away we look in the universe, we see distinct spiral galaxies at great distances in every direction. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. When we see these spiral galaxies, we see clear spirals, we see individual stars at great distances, but these galaxies are rotating. Now, we can measure how fast they rotate. Now, if you think about it, if some of these galaxies were as old as evolutionists claim, they would be 100 to 200 turns since they were created or came into existence. But if they had turned 100 to 200 times, when we take a picture of them, they should just look like a smear on the photographic plate. But instead, we see them as distinct spirals with just 1, 2 turns perhaps at great distances. This tells you they haven't been rotating all that long. As a matter of fact, it limits the age of these galaxies to, at most, well, a few 100 million years old. Now, if the universe is less than a few 100 million years old, then the Earth must be less than a few 100 million years old. Is that correct? You all are watching the bouncing arrows, right? Okay, I'll do that one more time now. Okay, see, there's the bouncing arrow, and the age of the Earth gets younger, right? Well, let's continue. There's too much salt in the seas. I mentioned there's too much salt in the Dead Sea, but there's too much salt in the regular seas as well. Today, the oceans are approximately 3.5% salt content. Now, the total amount of salt in the oceans today would accumulate at current rates of accumulation between 42 and 62 million years. That makes the Earth's oceans less than 62 million years old, which of course would make the Earth younger. Is that right? And this is the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, made famous in the United States. It's in North Carolina. It was built in 1870, one of the most historic lighthouses in the United States. When it was built in 1870, it was 1,500 feet from the water. Okay, so it was 1,500 feet from the ocean in 1870. In 1989, 116 years later, it was 160 feet from the ocean. I don't think the lighthouse moved. Well, actually, it did. You see, in 1999, we moved it back 2,950 feet from the water to try to preserve it as a historic lighthouse. But even now, we think it may only preserve it for another 100 years. And let's think about this erosion problem. These are the White Cliffs of Dover, made famous in song and history. Now, evolutionists say that the White Cliffs of Dover are Cretaceous deposits made 65 million supposed years ago. And the White Cliffs of Dover are basically trillions of single-celled creatures called diatoms that are fossilized. It's actually what you make toothpaste out of. It is. That's the abrasive in toothpaste. Now let's think about this. According to evolutionists, the White Cliffs of Dover are 65 million years old, correct? I don't think so. Think with me for just a moment. The continents are all eroding too fast for the Earth to be old. The cliffs of Dover, if they were eroding away at only a half a foot per year for 65 million years, well, that would be about 6,200 miles of coastline that would have to have been eroded westward through England. That's greater than the distance between, say, Tokyo and London. If you hadn't noticed, England's not that wide. And these are 5 photographs taken from 1986 to 2002 at Happisburgh, England. You can clearly see in this photography right here the erosion of the coast in only 16 years. Is that correct? And you can actually see it happen before your eyes. Is that right? As a matter of fact, think with me for a moment. Since the Roman times, 2,000 years ago, the English North Sea coast has eroded 2 miles west along the east coast of England. We know of 35 villages in the Roman census 2,000 years ago that have been completely lost into the sea. That's an average of 5 foot per year. Clearly, that erosion rate, cannot have been going on for millions and millions of years. Is that right? There simply wouldn't be in England. And let's face it, if you erode off the land, you've got to erode into the oceans. Is that correct? I mean, you erode the mud off the land, it goes in the ocean. But there's not enough mud in the oceans. You see, when we take a look at the ocean floor, we have recently discovered a spot in the Pacific where there is no mud. It's exposed bedrock. But even being super generous, trying to find the greatest, thickest layer of mud anywhere on the ocean floor today, all of the mud would still accumulate in less than 12 million years. So that would make the Earth young. Is that right? And then, of course, this is the beautiful Cat's Eye Nebula. Now, a nebula is an exploded dead star. Now, some of them are beautiful, some of them are just downright ugly. But a nebula is an exploded dead star. Now, listen to me very, very carefully. In spite of anything you've seen on TV, radio, magazines, movies, or whatever, we have never, ever seen a star born. Did you hear me? We have never, ever seen a star born. If evolutionists were correct, then suppose it would take millions and millions of years for stars to be born. Now, have we been around that long? So we've never, ever seen a star born. You understand me? Another thing, too, think with me for just a moment. Now, I'll try to say this in the most diplomatic way I can think of, and I hope you'll agree it was. Tell me something. If you took one photograph of a human baby being born, okay, so if you take one photograph of a human baby being born, and the photograph was taken in the middle of the birth canal, could you tell whether the baby was coming or going? No. Not based on one photograph, is that right? We have never, ever seen a star born. But we have seen stars die, and when they die, they explode, and they push out gas in millions and millions of miles, and what's left of the star illuminates behind the gas so we can see the gas. It's, as I say, some are absolutely beautiful, some are just downright ugly. Now, here's the thing. There are too few super galaxies in our galaxy, or in the universe, for that matter, for it to be old. Now, we can count them. One star dies about every 25 years per galaxy. So approximately one star dies per 25 years per galaxy. Now, evolutionists claim that the Milky Way galaxy, that's our galaxy, is 10 million years old. Here's the problem. We can only find 200 dead stars in the Milky Way galaxy. This indicates the age of our galaxy is less than 7,000 years old, or perfectly consistent with 6,000. But if evolutionists were telling the truth, there should be 400,000 dead stars in our galaxy, but there's only 200. And understand that we can see in other nearby galaxies like Andromeda, we can also see stars exploding and dying. and they occur 1 per 25 years per galaxy, but they're missing. It proves the whole thing is young. I'm sure you've also noticed that the sun is rotating too fast, right? Come on, you've all noticed the sun is rotating too fast, right?
I did.
Please do me a favor, don't go out and stare at it. But I want you to think about this. As the Earth and Moon are rotating, so is the sun. The sun is a huge ball of gas. It's 860,000 miles across. It's basically 430,000 miles in radius. It's a huge ball of gas, and it is rotating. Now, it is incorrect to believe that the sun is a huge fusion furnace that's all burning up. That is not true. It isn't burning up. But there is a small fusion furnace in the center of the sun, which is, so to speak, burning up. Now, that fusion furnace in the center is producing particles which are trying to get out of the sun. So let's think about this. Particles are leaving the center of the sun, but as they're trying to get out, they get in the way of the particles coming around. Okay, so the particles are trying to come out, but they get in the way, hinder the particles rotating around, just as the tides on Earth slow the rotation of the Earth. So the tides slow the Earth. Here, in this case, the particles coming out slow the rotation of the outer layers of the sun. This would eventually stop the outer rotation of the sun, but the sun is still rotating. And since the sun is still rotating, we know it has been rotating for a very short time. As a matter of fact, it's only been rotating for less than 1 million years. Now, if the sun has been rotating for less than 1 million years, that would make the Earth young. And there's too much dust in near space. Doesn't matter where we look in the solar system, between the planets, the moons, and so forth, there's too much dust. You see, 98% of the mass of the solar system is in the sun, has tremendous gravitational force, but so do the planets and the moons. But there's too much dust, because if the solar system were millions and millions of years old, gravity of the sun and the planets, well, this gravity of the sun and the planets would all pull that dust in. It would sort of vacuum the solar system, and there wouldn't be any dust, but the amount of dust that we now know to exist limits the solar system to only a few thousand years old. Well, I think it would admit that would make the Earth young. Is that correct? And then, of course, there's the decay of the Earth's magnetic field. In my personal opinion, the decay of the Earth's magnetic field is one of the single strongest arguments for a young Earth. As a matter of fact, it's irrefutable. There has never been a totally adequate explanation by evolutionists for this. We've been able to measure the decay of the Earth's magnetic field since the early 1800s. But it decays in the same way that a radioactive material decays. It has a half-life. That half-life is 1,400 years. So every 1,400 years, 1/2 of the strength of the magnetic field decays. Now, if you go back in time, it would double, right? So let's think about something. The Earth's magnetic field is tremendously important because the magnetic field of the Earth protects us from the deadly radiation that comes from the sun. The cosmic winds, the deadly radiation that comes from the sun is ionized. It comes and hits the Earth's magnetic field. The Earth's magnetic field bends it and comes in at the North Pole and the South Pole. It causes what's called the Northern Lights, the Southern Lights, the Aurora Borealis, the Aurora Australis. But this is deadly radiation streaming into the Earth's. Now, if we didn't have the Earth's magnetic field, that deadly radiation would come straight in and kill everything on the Earth. So the magnetic field of the Earth is tremendously important to us even being alive today. Now, it will be gone in about 2,000 years. This is one reason why I know scientifically that the Lord Jesus is coming back sometime fairly soon. Because I've read the book, and there's going to be people here to meet him. And because of the decay of the Earth's magnetic field, the Earth isn't going to last for a whole lot longer. But if I go back...
He's got a lot of other videos on dinosaurs and that. And he proves the dinosaurs can't be older than 6,000 years old as well. So he's really done his research.
In time and double the strength of the magnetic field every 1,400 years, well, 10,000 years ago, the strength of the field would kill all life on Earth. So if you go back to what would be 8,000 BC, the Earth's magnetic field would be so strong it would kill all life on Earth. Without it, the sun would kill all life on Earth, and it'll be gone in about 2,000 years. We live in a very narrow band of time. Think with me. Based on the strength of the Earth's magnetic field, all life would be dead 10,000 years ago. So if no life, no living organism could possibly exist on Earth even 10,000 years ago, if there had been a 10,000 years ago, then is it possible for evolution to have been occurring on the Earth for the last 1.5 to 4 billion supposed years? Well, no. Is that right? And it's not going to last a whole lot longer. I would like to make this statement to you. God never intended the Earth to last for a long time once it became, well, imperfect. It became imperfect because of human sin. Did you hear that? So God never intended the Earth to last for a long time once it became imperfect. Well, this limits the age of the Earth to less than 10,000 years, and of course makes the Earth young. And then, of course, we have what are called short period comets. Now, I'm sure many of you have seen comets in your lifetime. And comets are basically big, dirty ice balls. They're just big, dirty ice balls. They're just rock and ice. We've taken close-up pictures. We've sampled them and so forth. Now, comets go around the sun. They get very close to the sun. When they get close to the sun, they melt. So they lose about 3 to 5% of their mass every time they go by. So let's think about this. We have these comets that call short period comets. Now, almost all comets are short period comets. There are a few long period comets. Now, short period comet means it has an orbit of 200 years or less. Now, let's think about this. We still have short period comets in the solar system. They would all be gone in less than 10,000 years. So the fact that we still have short period comets says that the solar system is less than 10,000 years old. Even the long period comets would be gone within 100,000 years. Well, that makes the solar system and the Earth young. And then, of course, there's too much uranium in the oceans. You see, uranium is a salt in nature. It dissolves in water and will go into the oceans. But there's too much uranium in the Earth's oceans for the Earth's oceans to be billions of years old. As a matter of fact, it limits the age of the oceans to less than 10,000 years old. Well, that would make the Earth young. And then, of course, high-pressure natural gas and natural oil wells still exist on Earth. Not too long ago, I was in our state of Arkansas. There were hundreds and hundreds of natural gas wells. And in our state of Arkansas, they were still finding natural gas at pressures of 9,000 pounds per square inch. But around the world, we still find natural gas wells up to 20,000 pounds per square inch. Now think with me, you only find natural gas, natural oil, and natural coal between layers of dried out mud or some kind of sandstone. Now sandstone has porosity. And when you go down to the beach and you see the wave come in and hit the beach, well, the wave comes back into the water, but you'll see the water go down in between the sand grains, correct? So sandstone has porosity, and gas can leak through a rock. You can actually push a gas through a rock if the rock is sedimentary. You give me any natural gas that occurs on Earth, any natural piece of sedimentary rock, give me any pressure you want to start at, I will take it into a laboratory and I will tell you how long it takes to push a gas through a rock. Because you can push it through a rock if it's sedimentary. Well, the problem is this. No natural gas or oil well we have ever found could be more than 100,000 years old, or the pressure would already have been released into the atmosphere, and that, of course, would make the Earth young. I've noticed these arrows are all stacking up on the right side. How about you? And there's not enough Stone Age skeletons. Now, if a skeleton is buried in the ground, well, if it doesn't become fossilized, it will still decompose. The molecular bonds will break down, and over time, the bone will actually turn to dust if it's not fossilized. Now, here's the problem about Stone Age skeletons. Skeletons are said to last perhaps 200, 250,000 years before they're just dust in the ground. Assuming a Stone Age population of 1 to 10 million at any one time, and let's say the Stone Age supposedly produced people was 185,000 years, well, that would mean you'd have 8 billion burials. Please tell me, where is the evidence? Where are the artifacts? Where are the skeletons? We only find a few thousand skeletons in the ground. This actually proves that the Earth is young, limits the Stone Age to a few hundred years. Well, that sounds biblical. What is the, quote, Stone Age, unquote? Well, let me ask you the first question. Has there ever been a time on Earth when there was not a Stone Age? Did you hear that question? Has there ever been a time on Earth when people didn't use stone tools? No, there's never been a time on Earth when people didn't use stone. We still use stone tools today. Has there ever been a time on Earth when there wasn't an Iron Age or a Copper Age? Well, think about it. According to the Bible, Tubal Cain, 3 generations from Adam, was smelting ores before the flood. Is that correct? And I just showed you pre-flood Bel. Is that correct? Well, the fact of the matter is, what is what they say, the Stone Age? The Stone Age is nothing but the people living in the area of the Middle East, leaving at the time of the Tower of Babel experience and migrating to Europe, living in caves for a couple of hundred years, which was a smart thing to do in Europe, because I think you agree, you know, you think of Neanderthals, Cro-Magnons, and so forth. They're living in caves in Europe. Now, that's a smart thing to do in Europe because, you know, they're cool in the summer, they're, you know, warm in the winter, and they're incredibly cheap to build. And of course, today you can study Neanderthal culture. They had language, art, music. They were religious. They buried their dead with religious artifacts and graves and so forth. They were absolutely, totally, 100% human. Even the DNA proves that they're human. So the Stone Age is just nothing but the people who left the Tower of Babel and migrated to Europe and lived there for a couple hundred years, establishing civilization. And dinosaurs lived recently. You know, when I was growing up at Berkeley, they told me dinosaurs haven't existed 65, 70 million years. They all became extinct. That a human being never saw a dinosaur. When I was an evolutionist, I believed that. I don't anymore. You see, when you go to these natural history museums, they show you all these fossils of dinosaurs and dioramas and so forth. They tell you, oh, you know, they've been dead for 65, 70 million years. I don't think so anymore. For example, how many of you know, 1990, we found dinosaur blood cells in a T-Rex bone, and the hemoglobin was still in the blood cells. You don't believe me? This is an actual photograph of dinosaur blood cells in a T-Rex bone found in 1990 in Montana by the evolutionist paleontologist Dr. Mary Schweitzer. Now, Dr. Mary Schweitzer is an incredibly intelligent woman, unfortunately still an evolutionist, but she's a very talented paleontologist, a very intelligent woman. And in 1990, now she's a bone digger. She likes to dig bones, and she really likes to dig up T-Rex bones, and you only dig up T-Rex bones in Montana. So she's working at Montana State University Northern Campus in 1990. She's out digging up T-Rex bones, and she finds blood cells inside. Well, obviously, this discovery refuted evolution. Is that correct? I mean, I don't know the problem that I have. I have a big problem with blood cells lasting 65, 68 million years in the ground. How about you? Yeah, Emma? Well, when she found this contradiction to evolution, the university wanted to reward her, so they fired her. But being a very resourceful, very intelligent woman, she got a job at a actually better university. It was kind of like being kicked upstairs. She got a job with North Carolina State University. In March of 2005, she's back in Montana digging up T-Rex bones because that's what she really likes to do. And she found this, dinosaur flesh. This is real, fresh dinosaur flesh. Wow. It was soft, moist, resilient. You could squeeze the blood out of it. This little ligament right here was still elastic. You could pull it apart and it snapped back together. This is a blood vessel. These are blood cells. She is asking this question. How could these cells last for 65 million years? I think she's asking the wrong question. I think the question she should be asking is, are they 65 million years old? And in Spain, reported by the National Geographic magazine, well, this is 2006, we found supposedly 10-million-year-old frog and salamander fossils, but inside we found fresh bone marrow. Again, I have a problem believing that bone marrow could live and, exist in the ground for 10 million years, And we have found what are called living index or key fossils. Now, let me explain something, folks. I said earlier, evolutionists do not use radiometric dating processes to date anything because they all have 5 false assumptions, 7 false assumptions, and none of them work, correct? So how do evolutionists date these layers that are in the ground? They don't use these modern scientific techniques because they don't work. This is actually how they do it. They tell us how old the rock layer is by the fossil you find in it. Then they tell you how old the fossil is by the rock layer you found it in. Should I repeat myself? They tell us how old the rock is by the fossil you find in it. Then they tell you how old the fossil is by the rock you found it in. Everybody with me? And these fossils are called key or index fossils. Now, the problem is we find them alive today. For example, the coelacanth fish, the lobe-finned fish that's so ugly only a mother would love it, supposedly extinct for 17 million years. 100 million supposed years ago, this is the fish that supposedly evolved into the amphibians and then became extinct itself 70 million years ago, after it evolved into the amphibians. Or the Neopalina, a mollusk supposedly extinct for 280 million years. Or the Lingula, a brachiopod supposedly extinct for 400 million years. Or the taro branch, supposedly extinct for 300 million years, have all been found alive recently. The coelacanth was found alive in December of 1938 in the Comoros Islands, north of Madagascar, east of Africa. But they were found alive in December of 1938. They have never changed. They look exactly like fossils. They're supposed to be over 300 million years old. They've never changed, and they're still alive. Now, if they're alive and they've never changed, is it possible that they could have evolved into the amphibians? Well, that's a stretch. And exactly 60 years later, in 1998, we found another population of coelacanths alive off the coast of Indonesia, 5,000 miles away from the first population. Evolutionists are starting to say, well, you know, they're not extinct, and maybe they're a lot more common than we thought they used to be, you know. Well, all of these have been found alive recently. Now let's think about this and kind of wrapping things up. We have evidence that the Earth and the universe cannot be old. It doesn't matter whether you look in the Earth, on the Earth. We have more than enough evidence to convict. Doesn't matter whether you look near the Earth, in the solar system, in the galaxy, across the universe. We have more than enough evidence to prove it is all young, perfectly consistent with 6,000 years of age. Now, let's be good scientists. Let's take a look at the sheer weight of evidence. Now, evolutionists have 5 major arguments in which they suggest it may be billions of years old, but there's not 1 ounce of proof that it is old. Do you understand me? Evolutionists have not 1 proof that is undeniable that it is old. They only have 5 major arguments to suggest it might be old. We have over 200 arguments to suggest and prove it is young. Okay, so they have 5 arguments that suggest it might be old. We have over 200 arguments that prove it's young. Now, let's just be good scientists. Now, they have only 5 major arguments that, well, suggest it might be old. We have over 200 proofs that it is young. Now, just being a good scientist, sheer weight of evidence, which one of those 2 would you go with? Well, I think young is the only reasonable scientific answer. Is that correct? Now, Sir Charles Lyell, the evolutionist who was the mentor of Charles Darwin, wrote a set of 4 books starting in 1830 to 1837 called Principles of Geology, Volumes 1, 2, 3, 4. And these are the basic books that are the foundation of all evolutionary geology today. He is the man most responsible for the expression, the present is the key of the past. Now, evolutionists believe in what is called uniformitarianism. Uniformitarianism means this: it's the belief, the faith belief, that all the natural laws, all the natural principles, everything has acted uniformly in exactly the same way for an eternity past. So an evolutionist believes in uniformitarianism. It is the belief that all the natural laws, all the natural processes have acted uniformly throughout an eternal past, and that only random chance working through eternal mass, energy, and time have produced all the complexity we see in the universe today. Now, here's my last comment to you, folks. If Charles Lyell, this great evolutionist, is correct, if the present is the key to the past, then it all has to be young and cannot be old.
Okay, guys, I'm out. God bless. See you tomorrow.